Settle in. This is a quiet evening walk through the United States. A Cape Cod lighthouse lens turning like a patient star, the wooden locks and towpath mules along the Erie Canal, a Mississippi River landing where mailbags and cordwood change, Hans prairie grain elevators that hum like steady engines, and a Western Rail bridge whose rivets meet dusk with calm light. Well, move slowly, no arguments, no loud music, no sudden cuts, just workbenches, ledgers, timetables, and hands that know their tools. If sleep arrives, that's the plan when you wake. The story will be right where you left it. The first part. New England coast, late 19th century, an Atlantic headland that learns the day before the town does. The lantern room wears a crown of glass above a white tower, and the sea below keeps a long, even sentence. Inside, steps turn the way a screw turns, cast iron treads, salt softened, a central column polished by palms that never bragged. At the foot of the stair, a slate board carries last night's marks. Wind WSW, barometer easing. Swell from the east, a short note about a steamer's lights at 2 in the morning, and 1 bell 4 fog in the second watch. The keeper hangs his cap on the same nail, tests the latch, and begins the climb with a small can of oil, a chamois cloth, and the morning's promises. The lantern room air is sharper than the stairwell. He cracks a window thumb wide to let the glass learn the difference between outside and in without drama. The lens weights rings and prisms of a Fresnel stage, glass so clear it looks like disciplined water. He steps around the pedestal, unfolds the dust cover back, then lays the chamois across his palm and breathes once on a prism. Breath fog draws a soft oval, the cloth persuades it away. A whisper of whiting catches a smudge the night left, no more than the memory of a moth. And a keeper's sleeve. He moves in arcs he could make in the dark. Inside faces, outside faces, bull's eye, then the little shoulders where glass meets brass. He does not count, he watches the way light stops asking questions and becomes an answer. Below the lens, the clockwork waits polite under a bronze hood. He opens the panel and checks the drumweight cable wound neat. Pull spring showing its good temper. Governor vanes clean. The crank fits the square as if it had been speaking to it all its life. He winds until the weight rises to its mark and rests the crank where a hand will find it without looking later. The governor gets a finger flick, it turns once and rests without pretending to own the hour. On the gallery outside, the wind thinks it could lecture, the glass teaches it a softer tone. The lamp asks for the same care every morning and never complains if it receives it. He strips the wick tube, checks the shoulder of the wick for tunneling, trims a neat crown with a small scissor kept in a leather slip, and wipes the burner body with a rag that would die of shame if it shed lint. Mineral oil in the reservoir sits level with the line scratched years ago by a hand the tower still remembers. He tips a little more in with a funnel that ties to its own handle so nobody will lose it when the wine tells a joke. The chimney goes back with a twist that makes no sound. A finger pinches the air control thumb wheel and gives it the little persuasion that helps lamps agree with glass. On the gallery, the sea has adopted pewter. He leans elbows on the rail and reads it as if it were a book left open for him alone. Tide just past the turn, drift lines slanting to the north, a slate seam far out that says a squall has a vote, but not a majority. He lifts the small brass telescope from its peg, wipes one end on his sleeve out of habit, and lays it to the eye. A goal becomes a white karma beyond. A cutter shows a sliver of canvas as if testing an old phrase. He notes none of this, yet notes belong in the book when the book is ready. The weather log lives in a drawer that knows its handle. He opens to today's date with a weight flat brass, pleasant in the palm holding yesterday, from closing like a door with bad manners. Entries fall in the same order every time, because order makes men humane when weather does not. Hour, wind, barometer, sky, sea, visibility. He writes small numbers that do not lean, then a word that leans a little, because it is a word and not a number. Haze. In the margin, a pencil dots his private sign that the lens was wiped and the gallery rail had its salt brushed off. Future eyes will know what the dot means if they need to present hands know because they were the ones that drew it. The fog bell hangs below on a timber gallows, a clapper on a leather strap, and a striker whose iron arm answers to a governor wheel, and a weight that obeys gravity the way a mule obeys a known road. He drops to the bell room and opens the panel. The weight sits on the floor with yesterday's contentment. He lifts it with the chain fall hand over hand, not proud until the line marks the hook notch he prefers. The striker's pull gets a drop of oil. No more the leather collar on the clapper strap, it gets a rub of tallow that keeps salt from making a home in it. He draws the test chord. Once the bell answers with one syllable you feel in your ribs and boots. He writes bell ready on the chalk slate and leaves the cord hanging exactly where a sleepy hand will grab it without teaching the bell any manners it didn't already possess. If your attention slips a little here between brass and breeze, the tower will not mind. The lens will still be glass and patience the clock will keep seconds. Without seeking applause, the bell will remember its tone without asking to be admired. Down in the oil room, he checks the tins to full, one at half, one empty set to drain a last comfort drop into a jar for lampblack. Then to the rag bean. He wipes the tin lips. Oil on tin encourages dust, and dust tells Wick's lies. A ledger by the door keeps the shops. Small arithmetic, tins in, tins out, wicks cut, chimneys washed. He writes half brought up, because half isn't a word that likes to be left to memory. A knock from below, 2 knuckles that belong to the cove boat. Supplies come on a day that pretends to be tomorrow, and sometimes on the day promised. He takes the hoist line from its cleats and looks at the block. The sheave turns, not free as a gull, but honest as a wheel that has lived winters. He leans over, calls down, and sees the boatman's cap a shape that has not learned to exaggerate. The sling rises with a wood crate, coal, biscuit, mail pouch folded in the corner like a thought that knows it will get addressed. He snubs the line around the iron cleat, tests the weight with a knee, and walks the crate across the threshold with a caution that looks like grace. The paper on top shows the agent's hand tight, straight and the heel of a stamp. He sets the crate where a man can get at it without teaching his back bad ideas, and only then cuts the cord with a knife that believes in staying sharp for reasons that need no lectures. Biscuit tin to pantry coal scuttle to the stove box, mail pouch to the table with the blotter, a new glass chimney lifted and set where the other spares will remember to find it, a bottle of whiting that will become part of the lens. Story when the next fog leaves a finger. He signs for the lot with a pencil that has been sharpened with a small penknife and not with pride. The boatman tugs his cap and bends back to the oars. He will turn behind the rock and be gone before the next sentence in the tower finishes. The barometer's needle yields a fraction to the left. He taps the case, not to persuade it, only to remind it he's paying attention. The balk gets another line at the hour and a note. Low swell, haze thickening east. He pulls the fog card to holes punched for sound bell as needed and hangs it on a nail where the other keeper will see it when the watch changes. The rule here is that nothing that matters may live solely inside a head. Rope, tag, chalk, peg, these are the languages the tower trusts. By mid-morning, Brass wants a cloth. He works a small circle on the lamp trunnions and the ventilator ring and the governor spindle. He will not polish like a parade. He will remove what salt tried this week without teaching metal to relish attention. The sash screws around the lantern panes each take a quarter turn in order. 1, 2, 3. So swelling wood does not invent angles. Carpenters never meant. The lantern deck gets a sweep with the stiff brush kept under the shelf. A tide of crusted salt and a few flyers from a blow last night leave by the door. Out on the gallery, a spider line that found its way to the leeward mullion gets pinched, not scolded. He has sympathy for creatures that build where wind is unkind. He has less sympathy for any plan likely to involve soot on glass. On the mid-landing, the watch clock waits above its box. He inserts the key, turns, and feels the spring take the hint. The watchman's route dial with its little numbered stations has its peg in at 1, and the pencil in the drawer has a point like a conscience. He sets the clock to the side table's dial, not to the town's tower. Time is the time the lens prefers. Later, the watch will circle the galleries at the appointed minutes and poke its key into brass eyes set invisibly near the stairheads and doorways. The paper will receive their little marks around its circle and prove that someone's boots made a circuit when wind and cold might have persuaded them otherwise. The tower is not mistrustful. It simply likes proof that legs and light live in the same hour. Lunch is bread, hard cheese, a slice of apple, and tea that remembers the washtub when asked to. He eats by the weather window that shows the bayside and the shoal beyond. The tea glass leaves a ring on the map table. He wipes it with his sleeve before his mind invents a lecture, and then smiles at himself because the lecture would be addressed to him. A small line in the log fog at distance is less a conclusion than a courtesy to whoever comes up the stair next. Afternoon asks for paint. The west gallery door needed it in October. October had opinions. He lifts the can, pries the lid under a rag, and stirs until the skin dissolves back into its idea. On the sawhorse, he lays a panel on blocks and sets a sash brush into white that will not last 6 winters, but will ask fewer questions until the 3rd. He lays the coat in even strokes, then tips off the corners so runs cannot propose themselves. He paints backs first, because backs always deserve the first respect. Faces will like their reflection later. A gull lands on the rail, looks at the world without requesting narrative, and leaves. The brush returns to the can for a breath that nobody will write down. A steamer's whistle comes in from beyond the haze. 2 longs, 1 short. He steps to the east gallery and finds the smudge of a stack and the suggestion of masts. He counts 1, 2, 3 before the next note. Hears a bell over his left shoulder from the shoal buoy answering with its own brass syllable, and judges distance as if it were a board he could walk. Fog has decided to make an afternoon of it. He sets the paint brush on its hooks, caps the can, takes the bell key, and goes down. Outside, the bell takes 2 strokes from the test chord clear, then clearer, and agrees to work. He sets the weight and starts the engine. Its little governor leans into a measure a marching band would mock and a crew will love. The bell's voice begins its steady argument with mist, once every 10 seconds by the book, a hair quicker by the heart. Then back to the book. He climbs, listening for the telltale apology of a loose shackle. No apology comes. On the weather line at the gallery, he hangs a fog ribbon white because a mariner trusts that little flag as much as the bell when the world shrinks to the size of a room. If you drift a touch during this grey hour, nothing will punish you. The bell will speak without attention, the engine will keep its breath, and the lens will rest under its cover until evening makes a need that is older than anyone who ever kept it. The mail pouch waits with its string around the neck of a letter. The letter waits with its words about oil tins, biscuits, glass chimneys. Just 3 lines in a square hand. He writes them with a stub and a blotter that has learned patience. The afternoon boat will not come. The afternoon boat will come when it likes. He ties the pouch. She ties the hoist line. Bowline for the pouch neck. Half hitch on the rail. Tails tucked where wind will not persuade them into trouble. Evening leans into the room the way water leans into a hole. Quiet everywhere at once. He closes the paint can and wipes the rim. He polishes the chimney that will be the chimney tonight. Not the best, just the one he taught his fingers to know in dark. Wick trimmed, reservoir full, ventilator flues checked with a small feather to prove draw. He lifts the dust cover and folds it with the same fold. He always uses 1 habit more that saves a second tomorrow. The match comes from its tin, the flame touches wick and goes away. The wick finds its round and offers a ring of even light. Air will down a breath, then up the blue rim says yes without sullen smoke. He sets the lamp in the carriage and the carriage in the bed. The lens returns to being what it exists for. He lifts the clockwork governor hood and gives the fly a short encouragement with 1 finger. The table under the lens begins to move as if remembering a promise made before it learned words. Prisms slide light into steps that turn and turn. Outside on the headland, a fan of white sweeps the shoal, and the sea lane. A cutter out there will read this as place and habit, and we are seen. He watches 1 full revolution. The sweep counts its seconds with a discipline the book would approve of and checks the drop on the weight. It will ask for the crank in an hour and a half. He notes that on a slip of card and sets the card under the watch clock key, where he will not have to think later. Knight wants a chair by the weather window, a ledger, and a pencil already sharpened. The bell keeps the forks, Math the lens keeps the seas, he keeps the books. One light to the south, a schooner trimming to keep away from the shoal, 2 points off and 3 miles, if the ice still tells the truth after 20 winters. A line in the book, Schooner S by E keeping well off. He warms his hands around the T-tin and sets one palm briefly on the glass pane of the north window to check if frost will play tricks at 2. The pane answers a degree colder than his hand wanted. He makes a mark for himself near the sieve of stars overhead, the ones the town smoke won't take. He is not naming them to feel clever, he is naming them so he can tell the difference between what moves and what the eye invents. A little past midnight, the weight has eaten its troll. He takes the crank, inserts, winds until the counterweight stone sits at its line, and lowers the crank with the same caution as last time. The governor vane shows a sheen. He wipes it with the corner of the chamois and sets the hood again. On the lower landing, the watch clock gets its key. He touches the brass eye on the south stair and hears the paper inside except the pin. He touches the brass eye by the bell room and hears the same acceptance. The tower will tell on him as he sleeps when the bell has work that is as it should be. If drowsiness folds the edges of the room for you now, that's acceptable. The sweep will keep its measure, the book will wait on its line, and the bell will hold distance steady for anyone out there who needs a point that does not move. Toward dawn, the fog thins the way a curtain does when someone speaks a kind word. The bell engine gets one more turn of the weight. Then a pat like one gives to an animal that did exactly what it should and will later. The lamp flame steps down a breath to meet the paler sky without letting Sook propose an alliance. He sits on the stair one level below the lantern and watches the steps of light go a little grayer. The lens breath makes a small halo on the window where outside air mixes its opinion. He waits for the moment when light from the east side is no longer a stranger to a room that runs on glass, then takes the extinguisher and, with one sigh from the wick and none from the room, lets night go. The day begins again in brass and glass. Chimney off, wick trimmed while warm, reservoir topped, soot imagined, and then defeated with cloth and habit. He writes the hour of extinguishing and the wine's apology for the fog. He notes a short remark about the schooner, seen again at dawn, canvas darker than the sky, no distress. Down on the rocks he walks the path that has learned his solace. He checks the mooring eye at the hoist and the iron ring at the top of the landing ladder. Russ lives here, the way stories live in kitchens, both need addressing and seldom need speeches. He rubs a little tallow on a hinge and brushes sand from the step that likes to collect it. He finds the mark the last high tide left on the granite 1 hand higher than yesterday and tells his head that the book will want that, and his head that it can stop thinking about it now. Back in the room under the light he opens the ledger and draws a small diagram for boxes, oil, bell, lens, clock. Each gets a pencil tick. The diagram is not for the inspector. He could talk for an hour without a diagram. It is for the moment when a brain at 2 in the morning enjoys inventing whirring. A tick makes a better lullaby than whirring. The town wakes behind the dunes. The cove boat touches in with a boy whose job it is to take the pouch back. The keeper lowers it with the rope in a slow square, 2 hands, a little turn around the cleat, a pause so the boy can make his knot. He does not say anything about knots the rope will teach, and so will a quiet eyebrow if it needs to. The boy waves the way boys wave. The keeper raises a hand to the brim without moving the rest of himself. The boy will remember that calm more than he remembers a speech. The rest of the morning belongs to small repairs. A lantern pane wants a bead of putty where age had an opinion. He rolls the rope of putty on his palm, presses it with a knife that knows which side to clean on a rag, and leaves a line that will not leak and will not try to look like art. The trap at the foot of the stair that keeps drift from becoming bedfellows with the oil tins gets lifted, and the dustpan empties itself into the barrel with the lid that fits. The hinge on the pantry door accepts a screw 1 size bigger and a match sliver to give the wood back a conversation it can enjoy. By noon, The headland is again a room, with many windows learning to be one sky. The bell is quiet, poised, strap a shade warmer, where leather remembers work in fog. The lens wears its dust cover like a winter coat left unbuttoned. The book is open to a line that will receive a number when the barometer persuades the needle a trifle back. He warms his palms over a kettle that does exactly what kettles do at the ends of continents. Out on the water, a steamer's stack writes a line that smears and then tidies itself at the wine's request. The keeper watches without urgency and reaches for the pencil that lives on the string tied through the log spine. Not because pencils like strings, but because gravity likes laughter. And so the day and the tower go on prism, rope, entry bell, oil, entry glass, crank, entry work that frees the head and steadies the hour. Out there the lane will take vessels that leave no names in his book. In here, the book will remember the names of wind and distance, and the glass will remember hands, which is what glass knows how to do when it is praised by light and ignored by pride. The second part. New York State, canal country towpath frost, taking the shape of hooves and boots sawless before the sun agrees to join in. The ditch holds a skin a bird could walk on along the banks. The middle stays water and keeps its quiet bargain with the boats. A packet's cabin windows show a low amber. From a coal grate a line boat behind it rides lower. Its deck neat with barrels, bales, and a crate of glass marked only with a ring and a number. Along the path, the mule team stands heads down, ears making small undecided angles. Collars settled tugs, taut to the wooden hames. Rope lead coiled twice around the towman's palm. Not because he doubts, because palms prefer memory to hope. The bridle bowels are wrapped in cloth. This month sound carries on cold, and some sounds work better small. We begin with the morning feed and a curry. A groom draws a card of iron over a shoulder, and then a soft brush after straw moves under hooves, and a bucket knows its way to the hook. He fingers a crack in a hoof and decides that grease tonight will be enough. He checks the hame strap that earned a new whole 3 towns back, and likes the way the leather has decided to take that compromise. He fastens a new link, the trace chain cold in the hand, but Willingham lays the tow line into the snatch block on the boat's forebit. The block mouth gets a smear of tallow. The line runs clean. He throws a look along the path to see whether the lock tender's flag at the far end is up or down, and what color. The flag is still sleeping. We will wake it when we should. A lock keeper clears his sill with a pole. Ice that slept where the mitre faces kiss as to slide away under a shove that knows where to speak to it. On the coping, a cast iron rack box sits quiet in it. A handspike waits 4 shoulders. The keeper leans on his spike, winds a paddle gear. One turn the sluice under the upstream gates murmurs in its throat, then speaks louder. Water in the upper pound drops to fingers. The chamber begins to take that difference seriously. A boy chalks a mark on a slate to short scratches for 2 fingers. The day's way of remembering itself before the book asks for numbers. The lower paddles stay shut a bit more full, will make the leaf heels listen better when asked to swing. If your attention loosens for a minute out here onto the frost on the grass, onto the way the mule breathes, nothing will lose its place. The water will continue to behave. The lock will find its level. The line will keep its own quiet geometry. Towman and helmsman keep an old conversation in science. The towman lifts the fingers and touches the brim. The helmsman answers by moving the tiller a handspan and then letting it find center again. A boy on the cabin roof coils a spare line into a flat cake and tucks the end under with a small satisfaction that exceeds the job. A woman in the packet's galley draws a kettle from a hook and introduces it to heat. The smell of tea walks past the hatch. It does not need to apologize. The lock tender raises his arm and the towman eases the pair forward. The team leans no strain, just work, and the boat noses into the chamber. Fenders along the plank rubbing straight find stone and decide to be helpful instead of proud. The towline pays. The snatch block rides easy. A man on the far side lifts a pike to push the stern off a stone that holds grudges. After dark, the stern obeys and then forgets it ever had other ideas. The keeper opens the lower paddle's slow half, then a little breathing pause. Then another half water lifts the boat. By degrees boards on the chamber wall go from wet to shining to dull iron dogs tighten and then relax as the strain moves. The helmsman touches the tiller once, not to steer, to let the boat know he is there. Up on the towpath the team walks. Hooves make a rhythm the bank understands. Pad, ring, pad, ring. The towman shortens the line a shade as the boat climbs. He drops one loop without looking and the loop falls, where loops always fall when they were taught right. He rubs a thumb across the line to check for a glassy spot, always blame a sand grain. Never the rope hand, finds none. His other hand carries the stick with the nail through its end. For checking the ice along the edge, the nail reports in a small language. Safe, safe. A little soft under the willow. Safe. The lock gate beams swing. Chain at the quadrant plate, walking tooth by tooth. The leaf faces kiss at a point, like hands in prayer. The keeper sets the dog with a brisk gesture and gives the handspike back to its place without theatre. He has a book with his own lines waiting on the desk in the house, and he will get there when he should. He lifts the blue flag for the next pair and lets it have its colour to the sky. Our boat eases out. The towman takes the slow steps and glances back. The snatch block rides right. The angle is clean. The tillerman has his shoulders rested into something like honesty. The canal's side works at its ordinary jobs. A culvert under the towpath carries a little stream through in silence. Its stone arch stays dry on the crown, because somebody in summer remembered the pitch and laid clay right. A waist with farther down holes. Its stop planks snug a thin lace of ice gathers above and below the sheen, like bad news to people who do not know that stop planks like to show you where they stand. At a farm wharf a man sets down a barrel painted with a stripe and an X. He rubs his hands and puts them into his pockets, as if pockets were invented for ceremonies like this. Our line boat is not their errand today, but the man watches it pass anyway, because boats teach a ditch to think it is useful even when it is cold. Toward mid-morning, the Waylock's White House shows ahead, its scale hall with tall doors and the lantern cupola that has watched for springs of paint go chalky and then get confessed and covered again. The weighmaster sets his spectacles and pulls the book forward. To boys throw the check ropes over bollards, where the paint remembers many winters. The boat eases into the scale chamber, keel settling onto a cradle that knows the weight of boats, like it knows the names of men who write plainly in winter. The weighmaster nods to the man at the balance beam. The beam climbs, hesitates, and then rests when the sliding bus finds the number the book likes. The weighmaster reads, the clerk writes, the clerk dries with sand. The captain nods, the toll becomes so many cents. Not enough to hurt, enough to keep stone dressed and paddles greased. A stamp bites a ticket. The ticket folds into a pocket that protects it like a mother hand, and also knows how often pockets fail at that job. If drowsiness lowers the edges of what you see here, the scale will not misread for that reason. The beam will still find its level. The clerk will still make his figure. The rope will hold the boat as if it forgave winter by habit. The road along the bank crosses the ditch, the change bridge, a sharp climb, and a right turn that shortens the tow rope and makes mules remember which shoulder to favor. The towman lets line pay, then gathers it with 3 quick pulls, so no kink finds a reason to be born. The team takes the timber deck without complaint. On the far side, the line runs again, if it never saw geometry before and now likes it. A boy on a roof points at a heron. The heron declines to be a lesson and moves a yard along the reed line without explaining why. At the next lock a woman stands with a basket of pies wrapped in cloth. The crew owes her 4 last week's bundles. She takes to small coins, sets the basket on the coping while she ties the string around a parcel for a coal boat behind us, and looks past all of us to the sky at the very far horizon. She does not say storm, but the way she ties says she expects tomorrow to be the kind of day when people are grateful for good string and short errands. A feeder canal meets the main at a guard lock. The guard leaves are set a little wide and a little tall. Their hinges speak in a heavier voice, because they are the place where the feeder has to admit its manners, not insist on them. The man at the cranks has a scarf wound twice under his cap, and his gloves carry a crust of brine that will take until April to give up. He watches the water as if it had taught him reading. He opens half and checks the slope of the surface where the two waters bargain. He shuts a quarter and watches again. He sets his boot on a timber and leans his chin on a mitten and lets time play without arguing. This is a lock too, but it is a lock that works in speeches no boat hears, only banks. Noon finds us at a lift bridge where the tender keeps a stove that produces exactly enough heat and no more. He steps out with the iron crank and sets the bridge to rising. Chains lift counterweights, settle planks move slow with a grace they never try to notice. He nods once to the towman and the towman nods back, the ancient trade of nods that keeps canals from inventing horns. A boy runs across behind the bridge as it lifts and gets a quiet look from the tender's eyes and discovers that a look can teach without a word. The boy stops before the far rail and lets the boat go under and then runs on. He will run a little less the next time, and one day not at all. By the afternoon, the wind has settled into a smaller version of itself, the kind that pretends to be a weather report for the benefit of one ditch. The towman unrolls a length of burlap and ties it around the mule bells, so there is only the memory of music. He speaks to the near mule once softly, the way men do when they agree with animals and the mule agrees. A woodlot along the far bank shows saw marks as a landing cordwood lies stacked with top pieces laid lengthwise, because someone was taught that rain should be invited to go away quickly whenever it wants to. A man is shaving a pin down for a whiffle tree. He has a knife, and the stick, and the patience, which are the three tools needed for more jobs than anyone admits. In late afternoon, we take an aqueduct over a river. Stone piers hold trough and towpath with the kind of seriousness rivers respect. The current below makes a different sentence, faster and rougher, but we do not need to read that language today. A hawk rides the difference in air over the water, and the ditchet knows something about winter men do not. Our team shortens stride a hair on the stone, and then lengthens it after, as if even hooves understand bridges. A church spire in the far town holds the last sun. Somebody is using a small hammer on a piece of tin. That spire, we do not know why, and do not need to. The sound says both that work is still walking the streets, and that your room by the stove will be there when you want it. You can let your eyes ease here. The boat will continue to pass between stone that does not change its mind. The team will step and breathe. The rope will work along the fair lead like it has always understood friction and how to be friends with it. We pull in at a basin to take on a sack of meal and leave off to barrels whose staves have their own ideas about holding together in January. A cooper squints at a hoop and taps it where it will listen, not where it will argue. He says to no one in particular that men who think iron bands are the whole story have not learned to talk to wood. He means it kindly. He takes our barrel and gives us back the same barrel half an hour later, more patient and less likely to teach the boat how to swim without permission. Evening asks for light. The packet's cabin wears an amber that sits behind curtains. The freight boat's deck lanterns show low circles that bulbs would shame, but wicks respect. A boy sets one lantern on the cabin roof and ties its bail to a peg. A woman inside clicks a lid onto a tin and sets it on a shelf that has learned how to forgive motion. The helmsman pulls his collar up. The towman loosens his scarf by one thumb's width, so breath and cloth can make a treaty. The team's backs carry a white sugar of frost. They do not comment. At the next lock, the tender has set a small lamp by the rack. He cranks slow and looks twice at the flood rising in the culvert, because ice likes to try the same joke on men it has tried on boys. He takes a stick and clears a sliver from the paddle slot. The stick comes away with the sound of a pencil sharpened by a careful father. The tender lays the stick on a beam where he will find it again. The boat rises, the dog drops, the gates come and go like to old men, finishing a point and then agreeing to talk about something more useful. The helmsman thanks him with his hand. The tender answers with a move that could have been a shrug in a different family. Night closes in the way a wool blanket does when you decide it will be allowed to. Stars show in the black north water between the banks, not many, enough. The towman sets a small lantern where the line leaves the snatch block, a trick for the eye, and for anyone behind who might need to read our plan. He steps around a route that has learned to be a nuisance and will get addressed in May. He looks up at Orion and thinks the belt looks the way it always has when you have rope in your hand. He does not say this out loud. He will say it next year to a boy who understands rope. The waylock at the far town works at night too, when winter says so. The weighmaster's stove keeps a coil of steam in the corner. The beam creaks an inch and then settles. The clerk taps a pen from the habit of tapping a pen even when pens might not need tapping. The boat rests on the cradle, then eases off. The chalk mark on the stern that shows how she sat last time exists for men who may be tempted to argue with numbers. The chalk mark and the numbers agree without being made to. The clerk glances at his pocket watch 15 minutes later than the plan. This means the lockman 2 miles down will be forgiving at 10, asked politely at 9:30. Midnight belongs to water and wood and rope and quiet. The mules blow steam. Grain in their bellies finds its purpose. Hooves find the narrow path at a speed the man holding the line could tell you about without ever counting. He walks, he rubs the rope against his glove and knows whether it will be happier with a half wrap or with the glove alone. He moves his shoulders the way men do who work outside. He thinks of nothing he can repeat later, and production grows from that. The boat rides clean. The rope slants. The canal keeps its level the way a spirit level does in a carpenter's pocket. Toward morning we tie up short of a winter bridge where snow still argues with the planks. The team goes to a shed with a lantern hung low where warmth lives near straw. The towman rubs a flank. The mule turns his head slow, simple, and then decides to keep eating. The man smiles without anyone seeing. He sets a pail where hooves will not find it and leaves a hand along the neck longer than he meant to, because he is warm where his hand is, and that feels like something that belongs to his job. He goes out and closes the door as if doors were invented for exactly that sound. On deck, snow begins a fine dusting that will either keep its sense or settle into a small trouble. The helmsman tips the tiller up and lashes it to a pin so it will not think it owns the night. He puts the deck lantern in the lee of the cabin and turns the wick down to a word instead of a sentence. Inside, the ledger lies open for a line about tolls and weight and hours and locks made. He writes small and true. He sands the line. He breathes into his fingers and lays the pen in its notch. He closes the book on the blotter with a weight that comes from the page itself and not from a hand. If you drift off here, the boat will not forget you. Water will hold to the bank's rope, will stay on its post, the people will rest where their work left them. Morning keeps the place. The third part. Lower Mississippi, a bend that keeps its own counsel before it lets go of the bank. Fog has not earned the right to be called fog, more a lace over the water that shows a wheel wash before it shows a hull. The landing is a wooden letter pressed into the mud, crib timbers, a face of poles sheeted with plank, a slope where carts learn careful down to the stage where a steamboat's gangway will find its work. The warehouse behind is simple, wide doors, a scale big as a bed, a desk with pigeonholes, and a stove that claims it warms the whole river when no one argues. On the wall a chalk slate carries a tidy crowd of names and times. Upbound pack at noon, downbound cotton boat before dusk, wood raft when it decides. No one pretends the slate outranks the river. It only hopes to stay in the conversation. The first sound is not a whistle. It's the easy clatter of a wooden truck over plank and the local menus when a bale's corner suggests it might like a different angle. A cotton bale, sacked and banded with iron ties, rides the truck like a quiet, heavy opinion. The checkers boy chalks a square on the floor where the bale will rest without teaching the plank bad habits. A peavy hook and spike on a stick leans within reach. It serves both as a lever and as a way to talk to wood. The bale slides to its chalk mark. The boy turns his chalk sideways and draws the number the manifest will respect, not for art, for memory that does not forget when it rains. At the desk, the clerk sets his ledger straight and uncaps yesterday's ink. Bills of lading wait in a neat pile, their blank corners promising a day with fewer questions. The scale bean gets a glance. Leaf weights in a drawer carry their own little faces of lead and tin. The bean travels, hesitates, and settles where gravity believes. He notes the figure in a hand that saves curves for Sundays. A stamp town name set backward in metal sits in a dish of blotter. He warms the stamp in his palm and sets its face to the paper once, clean, then dusts with sand and tips the sheet. He ties papers with string and cuts the tails the same length every time, because that is how he keeps the day deliberate. Down on the stage, the river speaks from around the bend. It says wheel first, then paddlebox, then a bright paint line on a guard deck that shows itself the way a shy person shows a hand in a doorway. The pilot gives a breath on the whistle that is more greeting than announcement. The bank answers with the creak of trees practicing being wharf poles. The mate on the foredeck sets men to lines. He throws a lead line for the last feet 3 fathoms. Then 2.5, and the wheel listens like a good horse. The stage plank comes ashore with the courtesy a bridge would try to remember if it had to travel. The plank foot meets the landing just to the left of the chalked groove. That means here we like it. The mate looks and shifts a hand, the men rock, and the foot slides to the groove and breathes out. Lines, a headline to the upriver bit, a stern line to the downriver post. The men set a round turn unto half hitches, because this is not a day for cleverness. The boat eases against her fenders and holds like a visitor who brings his own chair. The stage hands lay a stringer of plank, edge to edge. From guard to dock a skid board comes to rest along a bevel that learned its angle last spring when the high water tried to teach other ones. Hooks tap wood. Ropes decide to be lines and not stories. Mail first, because paper expects to arrive where people practice time. The route agent at the boat's mail table opens the pigeonholes, town names stenciled above, and draws the locked canvas pouches for our landing. He checks the brass locks, the little oval with a number, and notes the same number on a line in a book that believes in small squares. He hands the pouches to the landing clerk, who touches each lock to prove it is shut, not to imply he thinks otherwise. The clerk lifts the cancelling stamp from its pad, turns to the boat's outgoing box, and kisses the face of each letter with a ring of ink that says the town's name. Without bragging, he hands the bundle back to the agent, who will sort by bend and by habit. Inside the warehouse, the post table lives by the window. The clerk slits pouches, shakes envelopes into a drawer whose bottom carries a thimbleful of sand from bags spilled 2 summers ago, and lays them to town's upriver, downriver, inland by coach. The date stamp on a longer handle gets a good seat in his hand. He sets the day and month, checks the year, nods, and sets the ink's appetite with a scrap. A few newspapers go into a sack without stamps, because the editor paid for the year and the editor has a memory that weighs more than most stamps. The mail will leave again when the coach driver drinks the second half of his coffee and decides the second was enough. If your thoughts slide to the waterline here, none of these papers will complain. The stamp will still land square, the sack will where it's not honest, the watch on the clerk's chain will keep thinking in its slow circles. Back on the stage, the woodyard men step from the shade with gloves that knew pine resin when they were younger. Wooding up is patient work. The yard keeps its cords stacked as cribs cross-laid ends that let air speak to the middle. The mate agrees on account. The wheelman watches the list as if it were a polite guest. One eye. No fuss. Men shoulder to sticks, each lengths cut to the boiler mouth and walk up plank. The sticks go to the wood bearers on the guard. Wood bearers hand them to the firemen below through the slide by the ash ring. The firemen stack near the mouths in the ash stippled blue, where the furnace says what it will say, regardless of men's opinions. The spark arrestor keeps its promise at the top of the stack wire screen, and wet burlap under a drip tap that sands sparks into the river's way of talking. The scale on the dock watches the cords more than the men do. A tally board holds chalk, hatch marks like a picket fence, every 5th mark a door, every 5th door a porch. The yard boss looks at the stack. If he were measuring with his jaw, he nods when the last stick rides by and calls a figure that equals a sum of men, water, and weather. The captain touches the brim of his hat to the yard boss, and the yard boss touches his own brim to economies, approving of each other. Freight follows in a list that knows how to walk. Barrels of flour white dust at the chime, hogsheads of sugar iron hoops, singing a short dry note as they bounce. The skid crates marked with glass rings and a number that says handle me like a thought, not a brick. Bale hooks in hands lift without puncturing men. Do not argue with the lesson. The first time a bale leaked and the sugar called bees, the way a bell calls practice. A steelyard scale slung from a beam takes the weight of a sack of salt. The beam moves a thumb's width. The slides the man with the tobacco plug in his cheek subtracts with his brow and grunts what the numbers already wrote. Good. A dray comes down the slope with its chains crossed under the load. The mule breathes thorough. The drayman lifts the backboard and slides 2 crates forward, then breaks the wheel with a rough block that had a handle once and now has none. He taps the hubs with the handle of his whip iron, answers with listens. When the stage is clear of mail and people who do not need to be near heavy things, he lays the plank a hand width to the side, so the crate will think about the right part of the deck. The mate nods, men lean wood and rope and plank decide to be decent to one another. Midday gives the boat a stillness that is not rest. The engineer down below hums the low song engines hum when they are content, and a hand checks a bearing with the back of it. The pump throws a thin thread into the river. Nobody watches the thread, as art they watch it, because a break in it is a sentence starting wrong. The deckhand takes a mop to the guard where would Slivers remembered to lodge. He mops not because the captain's I could catch him at mopping, he mops because bare feet at night appreciate a floor that doesn't practice surprise. A chalkboard on the ladder well reads names of places and guesses at minutes. The pilot has written in a careful hand with letters that look like buoys. Bayou Sarah Tent Natchez Dawn Vicksburg late. None of this is music to be danced to, it is a slow march anyone can nap to. The clerk copies the names into the cabin book for passengers who like to sleep with a plan near their heads. Sleep safe reminder quietly. If your eyes want to close for a while, let them. The river keeps a fine memory. The ledger and the wheel have patience enough for both of us. The afternoon brings a raft of stave logs to the far side of the landing. Raftsmen pole slow, the raft slides to a mooring ring with the manners of an old dog approaching a fire. A man with a marking hammer leans over and stamps each log near the butts a letters and a number, so that when they arrive at the cooper's yard, no one teaches the wrong wood, the wrong coop. He does the work with a face that would look bored to someone who had never watched a river. The initiated know he is saving the town a morning of preventable arguments. On the warehouse porch, a scale smaller than the floor, one sits under the window. A sack of coffee rides it a little poise on the arm, finds the answer, the clerk notes it, and pushes the sack into the corner where burlap lives with other burlap. He ties a tag with a soft cotton string that he keeps in a tin with a piece of soap to make the string remember kindness. The tag reads a name. He licks the pencil pointer sin and a habit hand underlines once and not twice. Back to the boat. The mate brings the purser the list that is a day made into shapes. The purser works at a table that has endured more elbows than most. He writes a receipt for the cotton and another for the crates, and one for the on-deck pig that looks as if it has already decided to be at peace with the world. He dips the pen, shakes it gently, presses it to the paper, and makes letters that will not have to apologize to auditors. He sets a blotter thick, well used, and then sand, because a blotter wins the fight, but sand ends it quickly. A woman with a child steps to the cabin gangway. The steward meets her without asking. Supper at 6, and the woman nods and looks relieved that some clock exists in this floating town. The child looks at the wheelhouse and at the brass bell under it, and does not ring it, because the steward's face carries both permission and a boundary in one set of lines. The child will sleep at 7, and the steward will move like water without waking anyone he does not mean to wake. Cordwood finished. The firemen thank the wood bearers with that small courtesy men give when they are too tired for words. The yard boss counts cords again. For harmony the captain pays with silver, counted loudly enough for the river to hear the weight, but not to become jealous. The yard boss bites one coin, and then decides biting his 4 men who want to be seen doing it. He puts the coin in a bag and ties the bag with the same knot his grandfather used on a sack of corn that rode a different river. The whistle gives a phrase that the bank recognizes as courteous. Lines come in. The stage foot lifts and slides aboard. The stringer follows. A deckhand walks the last plank to its rack and sets the pin through the ring, or wood will not teach itself how to leave. The boat eases out with a line ashore until the bow means to go. The stern line goes slack, and then tidy to deck a shove, with a pike at the guard the wheel breathes. The stern writes its alphabet on the brown water in white strokes that last a minute and then become memory. The landing is not finished for the day. A flatboat noses in with cypress knees that look like a family portrait. The men on it talk in low syllables that carry more weather than words. The clerk buys to bundles for the cooper's yard with the casual caution of someone who buys from people who trust the river more than the town. He writes a note to the cooper on a scrap, folds it once, slides it under a weight in the window so the boy going past will remember to carry it. The boy reads the fold as a bell and does not forget. Sundown lingers on the warehouse's windows. The stove throws a steady warmth. The clerk closes the ledger and rests his palm on the cover, the way a man might pat the railing of a porch before going in. He counts the remaining mail, ties the pouch, and sets the brass lock through the throat. The number on the lock finds its place in the small column again. He hangs the pouch on the peg that means ready. He leaves the cancelling stamp in its dish for the morning to find fat and polite. Out on the bank, the river holds its own clock under the skin. A skiff goes by with an oil lamp under a glass, and a man who looks like he does this at the same hour most nights, and for the same reason most nights. The man passes the landing with a nod that equals a paragraph. The landing nods back in lights, and in the angle the stage lies, both participants feel they have said enough. You can let your eyes fold here. The landing will keep the weight where it should be. The stage will hold its bolts. The ledger will keep the day. The river makes a long, slow sentence and expects only that we read a word or two before drifting, and then pick up the line where it waited. Night puts a hand on the roof and does not press. The warehouse door's hasp learns its own click, and the clerk tries it twice, because that is who he is. The stove damper turns to the notch lived in winter, not stingy, not wasteful. The chalk slate keeps the names and times, as if it was sure of them. The river doesn't argue. A dog chooses the warm spot under the desk and sighs once, a syllable that belongs equally to dogs and to people who write in ledgers. A cricket considers the sill and decides against an argument about seasons. The lamps on the landing poles shrink their flames to suit the hours when feet rest. Upstream, the packet's wheel thuds become berries on the dark, incountable if you like, ignorable if you prefer. The pilot's hand rides the spoke lightly, the mate's lists lie folded, the purser's pen dries with its nib cleaned. The route agent coils his string and slips it into a drawer, because string in a drawer teaches drawers good manners. The river takes the heat from the day with an indifference that feels like forgiveness. The fourth part. Merrimack Valley, late 19th century brick walls warming by inches, river air held in sash windows, tall enough to remember spring. The carding room starts the day before the looms believe it. Bales stand with their hoops cut and tails tucked. Cotton that slept crosswise now learns to point in one direction. The picker mouth yawns leather aprons, pinned liquor in, a bar where lap builds, and the man at the gate lifts a slat to let the first leaf in. A cloud the size of a breath rises, then decides to be heavier and sinks where the floor knows to catch it. Overhead a belt walks from the line shaft to the picker pulley. Cotton dust fretting along its edge, a habit that never becomes a problem. The oiler touches a drop to the journal and steps away before the belt thinks it's interesting. The lap, wrapped on its bar, goes shoulder high to the card. The old card of the one with the thumb that can read a burlays the lap to the feed sheet and hands the end under the guide. Teeth like patient sawgrass take the cotton, one staple at a time, and teach it to stop remembering the bale. The cylinder hums not loud, steady, and the flats ride by, teeth kissing teeth, dust drifting to a pan that will be emptied before dinner. A brush turns slow and wipes the doffer clean of yesterday's argument. Web flows to the trumpet and the sliver drops into a can, soft rope coiling on itself in a spiral that knows nothing of knots. He checks the sliver with 2 fingers, even pull, no slubs to brag about he nods, and the nod counts more than a signature. Along the wall, Cans line up for drawing. A girl with a kerchief sets 6 into the creel and lays their ropes into the rollers, low to high, the draft measured by screws that pretend not to care and actually care very much. The slivers marry, thin, and leave stronger for having learned to be company. She ties the end to the next can with a flat splice, palm smooth, the way she was shown by a woman who had learned from a woman before. On the bench a tin of chalk sits open, a fingertip underlines a label. D2 third pass. No one will be surprised later when the yarn behaves as if it knows its parents. If your attention wanders to the window, where the river throws a bright stripe on brick, the cards will continue to groom, the belts will keep their treaties, the cans will fill with ropes that prefer being ropes to being stories. Down the stairs, the spinning room has its own weather. Humidity rides higher here, spritzed from a pipe, with pinholes along the beam to keep fly down and temper right. A ring frame runs along aisle. Creels with bobbins of roving perched, like birds, riders and travellers, a hand's breadth from fingers that know where to stop. The spinner walks her side, lifts a broken end, licks her finger habit, not sentiment, and lays the twist back into company with a motion that takes less time than the sentence it would take to describe it. Twist builds, the traveller sings the thin metal song, it has sung for 20 years. The ring oilers can kisses a journal and leaves without asking thanks. Bobbins fill to the chalk mark and go to a case where a boy lays them head to tail and counts them on a board that likes adding by fives. He wipes the fly from his sleeve without looking and carries the case to winding. The winder sets the bobbins into arms that feed a single drum. Her thumb checks tension and knot finds itself where it should, not where it would have shamed a selvage. A faint click marks every guide crossing the room, hears it as punctuation and goes on with its paragraph. Warp day is a different grammar. In the warping room, the creel stands like a small forest, hundreds of bobbins in bays, each line paid across the alley to the drum. The warper walks the aisle with a peg and a pencil, touching ends that have opinions, persuading them to agree with the rest. At the drum, ends lay down in order like soldiers who don't want to be soldiers and find, to their astonishment, that order is comfortable. Turns build, the count climbs, the lease rods slip in to keep the book from losing its place. When the sheet is right, it comes off to a beam. Paper bands between layers, as polite as coasters under cups, so yarn won't pick up manners from its neighbor. Sizing is warmth and weight. The size kettle water, flour, a little tallow breathes like soup. The sheet passes over rollers through the bath and rises with a gloss that will teach the loom to behave. A man with a stick pulls a sample, bends it, listens to the small complaint that means enough, not too much. The sized sheet dries over cans that never learn to be loud fans, send a soft torque along the path. The beam receives the dry warp, layer on layer, edges cuffed by temples that keep width honest. A chalk writes W, 40 habs, 1240 ends P, 16s weft on the tag ties to the neck with twine from the pocket where twine lives. If you drift a little, the beam will not. It will wait, paper and thread counting each other, until it meets the loom tomorrow, as if they had been introduced long ago. The weave room holds rows and rows of machines that don't need to be named out loud. Harness frames lift and lower, reeds beat, shuttles take their corridor and return with the quick civic pride of things that rarely fail. The fixer arrives with a wrench in his apron and touches a box where a picker's stick hints at tiredness. He sets a new leather strap in, cuts it square with a knife that has never lied, and gives the stick one cautious stroke. The loom nods and resumes its plain argument. Over, under, beat, over, under, beat. A temple grips the selvage with teeth like patient lapdogs, never breaking skin, never letting go. The cloth comes over the breast beam and onto the roll with a face that will later accept print or die or a shop window. A loom tender at the end of an aisle keeps 3 frames and a chair she almost never sits in. She ties broken ends in weavers, knots that teach themselves to be smaller than the weft they join. Every 50 picks, she looks at the fell line and decides it still knows how to be straight. A needle with a hooked point lives in her apron, the better to catch a thread that thought it could hide. A rag tied to her reed hook remembers a little colour from a bolt last week. She will wash the rag when the colour thinks about leaving its mark where it shouldn't. Noise here is a background the head learns to fold in half. It is not clamorous, it is the sound of many small agreements kept, repeated, and kept again. The line shaft above turns, leather belts washing through the air with a brush stroke hush. Journal boxes get their cotton waste changed before someone has to teach them that smoke is not in fashion this season. A tin of oil sits on the floor with its long spout resting on a block because spouts that lie on their sides learn to weep. Cloth inspection waits in the quiet room, the kindlelight, the longboard, the lamp behind the glass that shows what daylight hides. The inspector stands with a chalk pencil between her fingers and the roll turning under her left hand. A seed fleck in the weft, she circles it once and notes a fraction in the margin. A thin place, she draws a star and lays a patch of paper there for the book to translate a broken pick. She makes a neat loop in chalk that another will later respect with a needle. At the end of the roll she writes the count of yards and her mark, not because anyone doubts, but because Cloth likes to know which hand saw it first. Packing is paper and string and a press that asks politely. Cloth lifts to the scale. The beam tells the number, a paper wrap goes around. With a clean crease, a cord goes twice along, twice around, then ties in a square knot that understands warehouses. The bale press lowers until Cloth forgets its wish to breathe like a curtain and remembers its duty to travel like a brick. A label goes under twine, a wax wafer accepts a stamp factory, date, a number that means, if anyone asks, we can answer. The bale rides a truck to the freight door and sits beside a crate of bobbins marked for another town, and both make their peace with waiting because a team will come at 3. Upstairs, the carder takes a brush to the flats while the frame turns on slower teeth. He lifts a flat, lays it into the cradle, draws the brush along until the teeth admit there is such a thing as too much lint. He changes one wire clothing strip because the last man who tried to pretend it could wait gave himself an afternoon of slubs he did not deserve. He hums the same 4 notes his father hummed when wire was newer and cotton came farther in fewer days. On the yard side, the millwright checks the shaft hanger where an old vibration had liked to live. He taps the bracket with a small hammer made solely for telling the truth. The sound today is right. He writes nothing, he draws the sound into a file in his head and sets it beside last week's and the week before. He tucks the hammer back into the pocket that thinks it was made for it. In the counting room, the pay envelope clerk folds paper as if every fold argued for dignity. He writes names in a hand that leans toward the right because the week did. Coins and bills slip into envelopes that will be opened near stoves and on stoops and at tables where a kettle and a lamp make a small house larger. He stacks the envelopes in a drawer whose runners learned wax in spring and still remember it in winter. The whistle on the roof does not need to raise its voice, the river carries sound and the brick throws it gently back. The first dinner whistle pulls the room into a little extra energy the way a horse steps, brighter, on the last turn toward the stable. Belts come off slowly. Not all at once. Inertia learned the same courtesy 10 years ago and kept it. The oiler wipes his hands on a rag that thinks it is immortal. He disagrees and throws it toward the bean that eats rags and gives them back as wipers when the man at the press thinks to ask. The alley's clear. The floor learns quiet, one loom at a time. Dust that was thinking of becoming air decides to return to floorboards. If you doze now, the frames will not take offense. Card teeth will not go dull for want of witnesses. Beams will keep their numbers safe under paper. The belt lacing will still lie true when you open your eyes. Evening crews come in lighter, just enough to watch the warper finish a beam and the loom fixer give a box its final courtesy. A man from the dye house brings a sample from a vat, indigo deep bell on a cloth the size of a hand. He holds it to the window where the last of day can speak to it and says, tomorrow. He sets the swatch on a peg, not a nail, because pegs don't grow rust. Night holds the mill in brick and breath. The watchman walks his stations, keen brass eyes that hide in plain sight. Stairhead, picker floor, weave floor, engine house. His lantern shows a small circle that thinks it is a law the rest of the room pretends to be asleep and likely is. He tries a window latch twice, not because he doubts the first click, but because second clicks make better sleep. He passes the engine house and hears the great flywheel breathe. Without motion, he nods tomorrow and carries on. In the yard, the freight platform holds to bales and a crate under a tarpaulin tied with a bowline that will be correct in the rain, in the wind, and in the morning. The river keeps the mill's time whether anyone else approves. Ice drifts in plates, the spillway talks to stones, the headrace takes its measured sip. A lamp over the gatehouse hangs steady. A small moon that asks nothing fancy. Someone in a boarding house to streets over turns down a flame and says a name. If the name will help sleep, it will. The fifth part. Prairie town, high sky. Afternoon that has decided to be generous. The depot sits where track and street shake hands, a rectangle of wood with eaves long enough to keep rain off men and baggage both. A slate blue clock faces the platform and keeps a minute that wagons respect. To one side, a handcar under a shed to the other. A water tank on timber legs with a frost jacket like a big wool coat. The agent's bay window noses toward the main inside it. A desk with 2 shelves of tariffs, a register book, a pigeonhole rack for waybills, and a sounder whose voice is all click and no fuss. We begin where the day does here, with inclines that tell steel where to be. The agent checks the timetable folded in a leather cover, with the corners rounded by pockets and years. Columns name trains the way churches name Sundays. He reads the footnotes first. Extra freights must clear now. To buy 10 past the hour at any siding shorter than 6 cars. And the remark about slow orders east of the river bridge. He lays a scratch pad down and writes in a hand that minds itself. No. 7. Do 346 water and mail. He tucks the pad under the clip on the window frame, where his eyes will trip over it if memory forgets its manners. The telegraph key sits on a shelf under the bay, its companion sounder a hand's breadth away. The line is lively at this hour. A dispatcher somewhere apriver speaks with a pen in his fist. The sounder's arm flirts with, and then finds its stop stits, and does to men who name such things to the depot. Simple speech. The agent lifts his pencil and writes as if he's copying someone's shopping list. Eng 143 with 8. Extra West meet no. 6 at Moorhead copy 19 for no. 7 form reduce speed between MP 324 and 329. He pauses only to ask for a repeat on a figure. Taps R with a glove knuckle out of habit and receives it back. He tears a sheet of onion skin from the pad, carbon paper between, and begins the order neat. Top line for the engine, second for the conductor, third for the dispatcher's initials. He reaches for the train order hoopash handle. Stiffed up string hangs the loop from its notch, and checks that the paper sits where a hand will meet it at speed without the string telling its own story. If your attention drifts out to the platform board sun-warmed, level the sounder will keep talking without needing applause. The order will get its numbers, the hoop will wait clean and ready, and the clock will keep its to hands in the argument they always win. Baggage makes its small pageant without thinking to be won. A 2-wheel truck with iron tires rolls out from the freight room. Its tongue fits a hand that knows how much lift is enough. The scale at the door wears a brass face with numbers the size of peas. A valise, a carpet bag, a wooden trunk with a brass-bound corner, and a hotel sticker older than the boy tying the tag. Each finds the pan, accepts the number the beam insists on, and receives a pasteboard check with a hole punched through for the string. The agent splits a brass baggage check the 2 halves mates forever by number and hands the traveller his half with a nod. The other rides the trunk handle ring and tells a brakeman later where to put it when the night yawns and men would rather guess. A cage of live chickens with straw poking out of its wire tries to claim attention. The agent writes coops on a waybill and puts it in a slot. Chickens do not read, but waybills do. Mail waits at the far end of the platform, pouch tied, brass lock kissed into the throat. The crane stands by the main, a wooden arm with a leather belt strapped back for now so it doesn't practice ideas. The agent checks the belt for a tear line and presses his thumb into the leather The way you do with harness, it answers the way good leather answers. Springy and modest. He sets the pouch in the house until the whistle becomes an idea rather than a plan. Along the siding, a switch stand shows day targets, red to the main, green if the tongue is over. The section boss runs a palm along the throw bar and steps the lever over to test its seat. The points kiss the stock rail tight. A splinter of prairie grass that had been practicing sabotage pops out and makes a fool of itself. He oils the hinge with a tin, whose spout knows about dust caps, turns the weight back to normal, and leans his boot against the stand like a man whose boots have learned to be friends with the ground. One of his crew checks a joint with a 4-foot gauge. The bars answer in their iron way. The gauge goes back to the jig on the truck side. Tools find hooks like birds find branches and rest there properly. Inside, the ticket window slides up the space of a coin, and someone breathes out relief. A lady asks for 2 cents. Paul on tonight's sleeper, if there's room. The agent lifts a fare table, runs his finger down a column, and pulls a book of coupons from the drawer. He writes with the little figure 8 flourish his hand does when it is asked to be plain and polite at the same time. He stamps the ticket with the station data, today's date, the town's name, and returns it across the tray with a small card that says berth 4, lower. He takes cash, counts it twice, puts bills under a spring, coins in a dish, and writes the total in the daybook, not because the box is untrustworthy, but because boxes gossip if you do not let numbers govern them. Next at the wicket is a man who wants a local to the junction. The little blue-edged local ticket comes out and clicks as the data walks across it. Some clicks are for show. This one is for the end of arguments. Later, the depot clock's minute hand lifts to the half. A far cry of whistle 3 short, and the agent is already at the order board handle. He pulls the rope. The semaphore blade flips to stop in the face of the incoming passenger, not to scold, but to request a visit. He sets the hoop on its peg and steps to the platform edge, where the cinders live and memories of last week's rain. He tests the water tank spout's chain. It drops a polite inch and then stops where it should. The hostler from the pocket yard steps out with a wrench in his back pocket and a rag across his shoulder, like a man who expects a question and will answer it without editing. If you let your eyes fall halfway closed, there's no harm here. The board shows its red face. The hoop waits like a promise, and the tank holds its com weight against the sky. The headlight shows first as a brighter idea than daylight, then as a circle. The engine arrives as if the town were a mile marker it loved. The engineer splits the whistle for the crossing, a courtesy to wagons. The driver throws a few white kernels of sand under the steel, where the rail remembered frost. The pilot stops just past the tank. The fireman leans out, waves once to the hostler, and the spout drops into the tender hatch with a wooden cluck. Water rushes, a sound that makes even men who never liked numbers think in gallons. Steam coils slide off the cylinder cocks, like old yarn becoming air. On the station side, the conductor steps to the ground, hat brim level enough to stand T on, and takes the order hoop from the agent's hand. He splits the string with a twist and slides the paper free. The engineer reaches for his own copy with a loop from the fireman's side. Orders read, eyes meet. A small nod agrees that between to mileposts the day will go a trifle slower, and that no one will make speeches about it. Car steps kiss platform. Passengers fold into and out of the day. A soldier's overcoat brushes a valise. A farmer's palm flattens his hat brim. A girl carries a cake box, like a reason for travel. The baggage car door rolls. The clerk inside reads brass checks off into air and drops trunks to truck heads, as if the floor were an honest man who still owned his shoes. The agent touches ticket to date stamp to times in rhythm, not a tattoo, a heartbeat. He returns change to a palm without thinking to weigh the hand that receives it. The conductor writes 3 words in a dog-eared book at his belt, numbers, a time, the station name. Later a superintendent will read that book and make a face like a man who remembers both a thunderstorm and a lamp that refused to be foolish. Mail now. The crane's arm swings out. The belt with its pouch sits snug. The clerk on the railroad mail car opens the catch arm watches the semaphore blade, and reads the angle of the agent's elbow to men who could have been brothers but were not. The train creeps not at a crawl, not at a gallop, just exactly at a speed that makes catching a game for adults. The arm grabs the pouch disappears, a fresh pouch flies back to the platform, and same breath. It thumps the planks with a hug and lies happy. The agent carries it under the eave as tenderly as if paper could bruise. Paper can. Up front, the water stops. The spout rises with a groan that has lived in timber since it was a tree. The fireman swings his scoop into the coal pile and lets 4 shovels fall to teach the bed to bear under the climb ahead. He checks the sight feed lubricator at the parade of amber drops behind glass and turns a needle a whisper, so the drops count exactly, as many as the division's hills have learned to prefer. The engineer runs a glove along the rod and lays his palm on the warm brass of the injector. Heat speaks, he listens, he smiles, because this engine and he understand each other's good and bad hours without needing to say so. At the switch, the section boss holds the lever with his knee, while the brakeman crosses over to cut the freight that will sit in the house track for unloading. They lift the link with a pin. The pin clinks once on a knuckle and becomes an idea about gravity. The section boss swings the lever over, the target shows green. The brakeman calls a number with his fingers, then draws his palm flat. Stop there. Wheels right, quiet steel sentences in the frog without any large nouns. Car settles. Handbrake turns the wheel with the small sigh of chain taking up. Chocks ask for the mercy of habit and receive it. You can go on half listening and it will be fine. Steel keeps its grammar, oil keeps its temper, men keep their bargains with boards and bells. In the waiting room, a potbelly stove ticks. A bench holds to hats, one with a feather and one with a sweat-darkened band. Both hats intend to sit upright until their owners return and make of them what hats are meant to be. A glass water cooler on a stand breathes its coolness into a dipper tin. A notice on the wall names rates and writes in words that know how to be read even by a man who would rather be outside. The station cat performs the duty cats were given at Babel, to lie in such a way that men remember chairs are for resting as much as for decisions. All this takes 10 minutes that feel like 20 to a clock, unlike 5 to a mind that admires order. The conductor lifts his arm. The engineer answers with the bell. The agent sets the order board to clear, not in triumph, in the way one puts a lid on a kettle. The locomotive gives the platform 3 soft words of steam and decides to pull. The cars follow, each with a single noise to donate. The couplers say good, good, down the string. The caboose lantern nods and becomes small and becomes the sort of red that even a boy in dusk can keep in his pocket without dropping it. The depot is not emptied by a departure, it changes key. Freight work begins in deliberate measures. The agent opens the waybill pigeonhole and pulls envelopes with a pinch that refuses theatre. The drayman backs his wagon to the freight door and sets the brake block under a spoke. He throws a loop over a barrel and rocks it onto the bed without asking for extra adjectives. The agent checks numbers against the chalk the clerk inside set on staves yesterday. Chalk and paper agree. They often do, because chalk was learned on barns before it met ledgers and found out how to behave. Down the track, a handcar moves with 4 men aboard, pumping the seesaw handle with a rhythm that'll a heartbeat too. They carry a bag of spikes, a pair of tongs, a bar that almost learned to be a crow and then changed its mind, and a can of grease with a lid that insists on rattling unless a rag tells it otherwise. They drop to a joint that wanted attention last week and did not get its share. They give it all they owe in 5 minutes and then move on without the urge to compose a soga. Toward evening, light lies lower along the railheads. The agent washes the day from his hands at the pump behind the depot, wipes them on a piece of sacking, and puts the sacking back on its nail, because nails hold habits the way rails hold iron. He rolls the ticket data to tomorrow and sets it under its cloth. He flips the little window closed sign the way a man might lay a quilt caller down when a child has fallen asleep. There is a second passenger train at dusk. It needs less water and more quiet. He sets the order board, listens for the sounder like a man ning for a friend's foot on a stair, and hears only other towns. the sound as arm rests. He lays a pencil in the daybook and draws the last line under the last figure. His finger straightens a corner of a tariff that no one will ask for until next Tuesday, and even then only to satisfy the habit of asking. Night does not feel like a shut door here. It feels like a lantern trimmed to a smaller circle. The section boss crew beats dust from their coats with 2 hard claps. The station cat follows the agent to the freight room and back. The water tank holds its still black without comment. The wine turns over once and lies down somewhere behind the granary, as if it had agreed to rest too. You can loosen your hold on the scene. The depot will tuck its numbers in and keep them straight. The key will be where it is in the morning. The board will hang it clear until a wire asks otherwise. And the tank will be taller than a man's whirring. Late. A freight slides through without stopping, just a bell at the crossing and the white flicker of rods underneath like fish that approve of their river. The caboose lantern bows once to the empty platform and then keeps its counsel. The agent stands with his hat in his hand and picks up the mail pouch the downbound train shook off. For the town, he hangs it on the hook inside the door and locks the door behind him, and a habit older than a padlock. The key goes into his pocket where a pencil, a string, and a small knife live like a polite committee. He takes one last look at the order board against the sky and goes home, leaving the platform to moths who write their own tiny white parentheses around lamp chimneys and ask no one's permission. The 6th part. Prairie afternoon, the horizon drawn with a ruler, and nothing in the way except a water tower, 3 elms, and the elevator's tall wooden spine. Siding rails shine like to careful pencils. The driveway boards up to the dump pit are dry enough to speak in low taps when a wagon rolls, staves holding, spokes humming. The team taking the slope with a memory for angles. The headhouse windows blink in sun below. A door stands open to air that carries the smell of dust and a sweetness that is not sugar. A sign on the scale house reads, "Nothing you need to read now." The beam is the language here. We start with weight, and with doors that open the way a matter of fact opens. The scale man pulls the beam out of its slot, slides the poises with 2 fingers, and watches the pointer hover where gravity prefers. The wagon stops with its front axle on the platform. The driver sets the brake by feel, not because of distrust, because brakes like to be reminded of their job. The team nods and does not flinch when the chute board rattles. The man notes the gross in a narrow book that has learned how to rest on a knee. He chalks a mark on the wagon box, one quick diagonal, which is only for him, and then waves toward the pit with a hand that has done this so often the gesture has become a tool. The dump man lifts the steel gate in the floor with a hook and a short grunt he hardly notices anymore. The pit shows its dark throat. A lever slides, the trap opens, and wheat begins its fluent argument with gravity. Grain strikes baffles, breathes dust, and finds the boot of the leg below. The driver raises the end gate on the box with a bar. Not fast, a river of kernels reads the planks as if they were a map of the last county. A wooden shovel worn to a crescent helps what clings to the corners. The same shovel will hang with its blade up later, so its handle will forgive tomorrow's hands. Down in the leg, belts climb, cups bolted on like small, dutiful hands. The leg wakes with a leather sigh, then climbs to its stride steadier than a heart, not as fast. The electrician once called it 38 feet a second, but the men here measure by ear and by the way dust performs in a sun shaft. The head pulley at the top turns and the cup's tip grain leaves them in a quick rain against the iron throat of the head, then falls into the distributor box where a spout waits for its appointment. The distributor's lever stands by a plate with numbers that were painted by a brush that did not hurry. The spout man moves the lever to holes and listens for the change in the sound. There is always a change when weight chooses a different wood. Cleaner next. The stream runs through a riddle screen, then over an aspirator that draws away chaff and weed seed into sacks that will feed hens and not bother mills. A fan breathes behind a wooden wall and does not care if no one thanks it. A magnet sits inside a wooden frame with a face like a loaf pan. It pulls an occasional nail from the flow, the way a good friend will keep you from making a small mistake without making you talk about it. The nail drops into a tin with a clink, and the tin feels more proud than a tin should. You can let attention wander to the siding without losing the thread. The leg will keep its climb, the cups will go up and come down, the beam pointer will wait exactly where it was left. When the box is empty, the driver eases the wagon off the platform and brings it back for tear. The scaleman sets the small poise along its notches until the pointer leans, then lifts the big poise a notch and brings the little one home again. He writes the tear under the gross and draws the subtraction, as if it were a road between two towns he knows well. The net is the one the book cares about and the one the elevator cares about when it talks to a railroad car later. The driver signs with a pencil. His hand makes letters that look like fence posts, plain, vertical, and not eager to pretend. In the alley, the spouts hang like organ pipes, caps on, ropes coiled beside each. One spout runs to the shipping being overtracked to, another points to the dump for wet grain that needs a night with the big fan to go to holding bins numbered on the headhouse wall and a chalk that refuses weather. The foreman checks the bin sheet, a poll card with last week's additions and drawers, then tucks it back behind a nail where the last three foremen tucked theirs. You could wake him at midnight in January and ask how much you know. 4. And he'd have a figure within 100 bushels. Not because he is special, because rooms that repeat themselves teach minds to keep a ledger without paper. Out by the track, a string of boxcars waits with doors open to shadow and to the smell of wood and iron and older grain. The agent comes with waybills folded behind a rubber band and a date stamp in his pocket. He checks car numbers against his cards, then nods to the foreman. The foreman lifts the spout cap with his shoulder, pulls the rope, and swings the spout's mouth into the car. A boy hangs a hide apron on a nail so he can slide his belly under the spout later when the stream narrows. The spout man calls down the number of the bean. The distributor lever goes to it. A wooden stop sets in the slot with a sound that says enough. The first bushels drop like a quilt, falling to a bed. Grain moves fast at the beginning and then begins to think about corners. Inside the car, a shovel whose edge looks like a tired moon teaches the pole to be flatter. A man with a rake pulls grain away from the doorposts so the spout won't decide to be a door. They work with a patience that has no adjectives attached. Dust performs its light show in the sun coming through a knothole. A ladle of water sits on the sill for mouths that need a sip without interruptions. A cat, who came of her own mind a year ago and never left, chooses a spar above the door and watches like a foreman of a different trade. At the scale in the spout, the pointer sits a hair high. The spout man pulls a rope that cuts the flow a finger's breadth. The pointer smiles and returns to center. Every so many bushels the spout stops altogether, while the carman resets his boards 2x10s that make a sill across the door when the level rises. The boards carry old black numbers from other years. Nobody bothers to sand them. Numbers belong to wood once they land there. The shovel's song changes as the pole goes from ankle to knee to thigh. A broom in the corner waits for the last ritual. If your eye is lower now, you won't miss anything dangerous. The stream will keep dropping. The rake will keep evening. The rope will be where a hand expects it when waking returns. Back at the leg boot, the man who listens for trouble presses his palm to the housing. Warm, not wrong. He checks the take-up weight on the belt. It hangs where a chalk mark says it should hang. He runs the oil can's nose along the pillow block and gives a drop to the bearing that asked last week and was promised today. He taps the wooden cap over the boot bolts with a mallet. The ring is the right ring. Anyone can learn it, not many bother to. He does. The office chalks a train. The agent writes week to car's Eastern Mill and a number for each car. He pushes his spectacles up and opens the tin where seals sit, little lead or tin ovals with a slot for the wire. He checks the imprint on his seal press, town initials, and the elevator's number. When a car is full, he threads soft wire through the hasp on the door latch, slips the seal on, and squeezes the press. The seal takes the mark without complaint. He writes the car's number beside the word sealed and draws a check right next to it. Because a man can be interrupted by a knock and numbers that talk to each other are polite. A wind out of the southwest rises enough to wag the weeds in the fence and make loose paper decide where to go. The fan on the drying bean begins its sermon long, steady, reassuring. A man throws 2 handfuls of wheat into a tin cup, pinches some between thumb and a tooth, and says in a way that is not for show, "Good." He pours the rest back into the stream and gives the cup a knock against a post, so it won't deck the next handful in brand from the last. The team with the second load speaks with their harness. The scale takes them in, bing of chain, creak of spoke, patient horse breath made into steam in air that isn't winter, but has heard winter telling jokes. The driver says something soft to the near mare about corners. The mare knows all the corners here better than the man does, and forgives him for pretending. A boy carries to sample sticks, long tin spears with slots, and tests the box at 3 points, so the book won't be surprised by a wet spot under a dry. He twists and draws, pours 1 sample to the bench, rolls kernels under a palm, and returns the rest to the pit. He writes OK, the tiny place on the ticket where OK has lived for 20 years. Inside the head house, a sheet of heavy paper tacked to a wall shows the bins in squares, some with numbers, some with tidy slashes. A pencil on a string because gravity hangs beside it. The foreman adds a short line to no. 3. Subtracts a short from no. 4. And taps the paper once to knock dust off the edge. He doesn't smile, because paper doesn't need smiles. It needs no lies and clear corners. He gives the distributor wheel another quarter to send the stream to the shipping bean again, and calls down track 2. Second car. The echo from the spout mouth returns the message in the language of wood. Present. A boxcar's floor carries scars, where last year's corn learned to be convincing. The man raking finds a boarded crack, nudges a wedge into it, and checks with a look that says, "I know you." He lays a burlap on the sill where hinges will meet grain. He knows that even a hinge can learn poor manners if grain is allowed to teach it. He taps the rake handle on the sill twice for a rhythm, and then returns to pulling the crest down before the spout asks for another minute. Sleep can come and go here without insult. The elevator is an instrument with easy notes. Bins hold spouts obey men answer when wood and iron ask questions that have only one answer, and that answer is not loud. Toward late afternoon, the depot gives a small whistle tap and extra freight is coming to lift the 2 sealed cars and leave an empty 4 tomorrow. The engineer drifts them in with his hand open on the brake valve. A brakeman drops to the ground and lines the hand throw. The coupler speaks a single, civilized syllable when it meets. The agent checks seal numbers against his card, because the railroad likes to hear that number sung twice. He hands over the waybills with a stamp and a short line the superintendent asked for a decade ago, and everyone long since ceased to resent. The brakeman lifts a link, drops a pin, and rides the footboard looking back with a face that understands the grammar of cars better than the grammar of letters, and is no poorer for it. A last wagon, smaller than the rest, brings oats for the feed bean. Oats carry a different sound dryer, a little like a book page being turned quickly. The dump man likes that sound no better and no worse than wheat. He sets the gate, pulls the lever, and watches like a man watching his own handwriting appear from his hand. He knocks the last and closes the trap. He sweeps the boards across the pit, 1 pull, 1 push, and shakes dust off the broom outside, so the broom won't teach the office floor any bad notions. Evening is for sweeping and for putting metal where metal should sleep. The shovel hangs with its blade up, the rake leans with its teeth away from the path. The broom stands bristles high. The spout caps go back on, and the ropes coil without kinks. A padlock closes on the pit door with the kind of click that sends men home easier. In the office, the agent lays his pencil in the groove above the window and turns the date stamp to tomorrow, because tomorrow sometimes comes before breakfast in a place like this. He totals columns in the small book: gross, tear, net, bean, car. He draws a single line under the last figure and writes a smaller one beneath, because double lines look like pride, and the elevator prefers contentment. He closes the book and sets the scale weights to 0 habit more than need. On the wall behind him, a calendar shows a picture of a binder cutting wheat with 6 horses in a field that looks cleaner than any field ever did. No one minds. The calendar is allowed its fiction, the bins are not. Outside, wind has decided to lay its head down on the grass. Swallows stitch the air along the siding until the light becomes a fabric that doesn't need stitches. A lantern hangs from a nail on the headhouse and learns to be a circle. A pickup teen jingles once and then rests. A boy sits on the scalehouse step and pulls a wheat head apart, kernel by kernel, as if beads and prayers were the same idea on a day like this. The elevator does not pretend to be tall at night. It is a shape against the sky that most nights has one or two useful stars and one train far off that writes its own short geometry. The leg is quiet, the cups hang. Turned to air, the distributor lever sleeps between numbers without moving its weight either way. The spouts look like mouths closed against idle talk. The office window knows enough to hold a little yellow and then to let it go. If you let the story go thin here, like dust settling, the place will not be offended. The seal will still be crimped on the car in the morning. The bean sheet will still have its short slashes. The shovel will still be on its nail. The prairie keeps people's places better than people keep theirs. It is a kind neighbor that way. The seventh part. A sleeping country slides past the windows in long, even fields. The dining car wakes, early lamps turned down to small moons above each table. White cloths folded in squares, the size of a ledger. The steward unlocks the pantry door with a key tied to a short lanyard and lets the quiet in first. Under the sideboard a crate of fruit sits on crushed paper above. The silver drawer waits with its felt trays laid out like a map. Farther forward, the galley is a narrow, useful room. Coal range with a polished rail along its edge. Icebox with its drain cock set to a slow drip. A brass coffee urn that keeps its temper, if you mind the valve. And the order wheel small clips on a round frame, ready to turn. Inventory is the first chore and the friend of the last. The steward sets a tally book on the cutting board and speaks in the language of fingers. Cups, counted by stacks, 4 stacks of 6. Plates, 10-inch, 8-inch. Bread and butter, each stack gets its number and a tick. Cutlery, forks nested, knives aligned, spoons in the felt. He touches each piece with 2 fingers and a cloth, not for shine, for dust that learns to go where men work. Salt cellars sit on a tray, little glass buttons, pepper in tins, with narrow throat, sugar in a covered bowl meant to travel under a steady hand. He writes the page number in the corner of the tally card in pencil and draws one short underline. A simple line closes the subject and lets the day begin. Linen comes next. The locker door opens to stacks that have learned to be quiet. Cloths folded on the long edge, napkins in sets, aprons tied with string. The steward lays for cloths across the first table and pulls them smooth, thumb at the hem, palm over the crease. Cloth clips stoop to a table, catch the edge under the rail so a curve won't invent new geometry. Napkins learn their shapes, fan, bishop's cap, or the plain fold that minds a soup spoon. He takes the plain fold today. A small bud vase, glass heavy at the bottom for reasons that need no explanation, on rails sits in the center with a cut stem that asks for no praise. The vase gets a finger's width of water and the leaf trimmed where it would tickle a wrist. China lives under the sideboard. He warms each cup with a dip in hot water and lets it dry in the air, which is the safest polish for porcelain ever discovered. He stacks saucers in a short tower and lays the cups in a line facing the aisle so a hand that knows what it is doing can collect 3 without acting like it is collecting 3. Butter pats arrive wrapped in paper from the icebox. A knife scores a neat diagonal 4 later. The pats lie in a shallow dish set on crushed ice in a tray, so the car's summer will do less than it could. A cruet of vinegar and a small oil and its match mate stand by for the men who think a salad is a memory of home. The galley range learns its fire for the day. Coal from the scuttle. Draft cracked a finger. Damper set to the mark chalked on the door last year by a cook who knew what numbers a roast prefers. The oven takes its proof. A slip of paper that browns just at the edge. No smoke, no vanity. Pots meet the rail handles toward the aisle. Lids turned so steam walks away from hands. A stock pot mutters at the back corner, like a grandfather telling something sensible. The cook lifts the lid, nods, and sets it back without commentary. Upon receives bacon For the morning plate, a second receives biscuits that, like the upper shelf, both accept their place in the order wheel's day. Coffee is a matter for brass and timing. The steward measures beans by the scoop into the grinder bolted to the shelf to turns of the handle 4 cores. Then one more to teach the burr who is in charge. Grounds go in a muslin bag that has served more mornings than many travellers have slept. The bag drops into hot water in the urn. The valve stays shut until the colour says ready. He opens the sight glass, checks the level, and touches the valve wheel to learn the fraction that makes a cup pour well without scalding. Cups will come in pairs and be warmed first. The pour goes to a line learned by thumb and wrist. Cream first for some, later for others. The rule is simple. The coffee is the same every time. The cup is balanced, the saucer clean, the spoon placed at 4 o'clock. A bell in the vestibule gives a single note. The car ahead has made up the tables in the parlour. We will have people soon. The steward checks the swing of the galley door, the hinge size, in a way that says it will not announce itself. The order wheel's clips get a last nudge to make sure fingers will not have to think about them later. The pantryman slices bread as a line no one wrote down, but everyone respects. Slices ride a napkin to the table in a basket that prefers the aisle at a gentle angle. He ties an apron string around his waist, wipes his hands, and nods to nobody, because nobody needs the nod when the work remembers itself. The first seating is a small procession. A conductor steps in with a face that carries 2 clocks and a pencil behind him. A woman and a boy who will remember the china more than he remembers the landscape. Then a man who holds a hat as if a hat might have to argue with the corner. Then 2 labourers with hands clean for the occasion, collars brushed smooth. The steward seats them without asking too many questions, because early hours are for kindness. Menus lie under glasses. The paper was trimmed last night with a knife set by the window. The crease is square without any speech about it. Orders come in quiet words. Ham and eggs over and coffee. Hot cakes and grapefruit. Oatmeal, no sugar, and tea. The waiter writes with a hard pencil on small slips, 1 per person. The shorthand the cook respects. Slips clipped to the wheel. The cook reads with his eyes alone and lays a pan on the front plate, not the back, because ham likes the front. Eggs slip from a cup. The spatula knows when to move and when to let the heat talk. Hot cakes climb to the high side of the griddle, where the pond says yes at exactly the right second. The ladle measures without watching itself. Grapefruit halves sit under a knife that has learned how not to tear. A broiler warms a slice of bread to the colour of a map the post office approves of. Service is a glide. Plates ride the pass to the rail. The waiter lifts 2, sometimes 3. The turn at the aisle, made with the shoulder, not the wrist. Cups ride saucers without rattling, because fingers learned that early in a career. Sugar tongs take a cube, then a second cube for the boy, who looks like Hayes thinking about the second cube. Cream pours a line, and then a dot that knows when to stop. Syrup comes in a small pitcher with a lip that refuses to drip. Butter on the table, not on the plate. A small detail that makes a table look like someone thought about it while the train dreamed west. If your attention, let's go a little here. The car knows how to carry both of us. The wheel will turn. The bacon will find its plate. The cups will return to their stack. The order slips will finish their small arc without being supervised by a sleepless eye. Between breakfast and luncheon, there is quiet work that likes company. Glasses polish with a cloth that does not shed. Silver meets a felt block and receives no speeches. The sideboard drawer gets a wipe and a promise the knife will be where the next hand expects it. The icebox drains to a jar that will be emptied before the next station, so a wet floor does not learn to be a habit. A crate yields oranges to a pond. It will be a bowl later with a ladle and a price in cents that has not changed in a month. The steward checks the fuel box, levels the coal with a short shovel, and closes the door with a latch that enjoys being trustworthy. Luncheon brings a longer wheel. Soup in a tureen, whose lid lives on a hook when it isn't needed. Salad that learned its crisp in ice water and meets its dressing in a bowl, not on the plate. A chop takes the center of a hot plate. A lake of gravy pretends to be no more than it is potatoes, except a butter that remembers summer, though the field outside wears other seasons now. Orders spin around the ring 1, 2, 3 and return to the pass with a chorus of yes that sounds like men agreeing on the weight of a sack. At a siding, the car breathes deeper once, then rests. The steward fastens the cup rack on the sideboard. The pantryman sets the rubber mat at the galley threshold. The cook lays the lids at 10 degrees from shut, so steam will not argue when the couplers make a small sudden decision. A brakeman passes the vestibule and touches the latch. He does not need to, but his hand wants to know the latch is where latches live. The conductor sticks his head in and says a milepost number and a time that will be kept, because the men in the next car keep their times the way bricks keep corners. Afternoon brings the white cloths off and the striped cloths on lighter traffic, lighter hands. A pot of coffee stays warm, a pie lives under a glass dome, and a modest treasure. The steward cuts slices with a knife dipped in hot water between cuts, which is the only way to keep a crust honest. A boy who didn't finish his breakfast earlier returns with a look that says he wants to finish something. The steward sets a plate without ceremony and lays a small fork at 3 o'clock, which is the place where forks behave. When we run a curve, the rail speaks a longer syllable. Everything has a place for that. Cups in their rack, plates to buy too, lids turned toward the wall. The galley door latch closes softly. A cook's hand finds the grab bar that someone polished to a shine for a reason, not for show. The range keeps its even breath because the dampers have been shown where to live. Upon that thought about marching learns to stay. The car takes the bend. It is the same bend we have taken since last year and will take next week, unless the river asks the bridge to have another idea. Dinner resets the stage. Cloths change, vases refill, lamps turn up to widths. The steward tests the piano hinge on the table leaf that needed a reminder last month and says it aloud, not for the hinge, for memory's book. A man in a suit sits across from a woman in a travel hat. A miner sits alone and keeps a napkin on his lap, if he were remembering someone's joke. Orders turn. The cook lays a steak on the grid and counts under his breath, only because counting is a friend of even heat. The waiter lifts plates. As if they weren't plates, he returns with clean space for the coffee cups. Dessert spoons appear without anyone having to ask where dessert spoons come from. As night gathers, the steward makes the little rounds. He touches the valve on the urn and lets a spoon's worth of coffee go to the pan to keep the valve honest. He cracks the icebox door and closes it again, because the lesson is the closing. He checks the latch on the china drawer and hears the click that says sleep. He moves the order wheel so the clips sit at the top where they will be in the morning. He sets the match tin back by the stove rail, strikes one to light the last lamp, and sees that the wick even pinches the match out. The sulfur smell goes away into the flue, if it belonged there. If you drift now, the car will keep to its rhythm: steel, wood, china, breath. Nothing here insists on being watched. Habit is the night staff, the line is the bed. Close down follows a list learned by hands. Cold draft to the notch oven doors, a jar of finger ashes raked calmly into the pan and carried to the scuttle on the vestibule, where the smoke will go where smoke goes. Crockery washed in 3 stages: hot suds, hot rinse, scored with a wire basket to keep someone's favorite cup from teaching the drain invented nonsense. Boards scrubbed with a brush that leans its bristles just so, floor wiped with a mop that sits bristles up when it rests. Linen back to the locker, spoons counted into their felt, knives counted into theirs, forks into theirs. The tally in the steward's book gets its last check mark for the day. Outside, the line stays under us. The car sways in a measure that a body can learn. Somewhere ahead a bell goes soft at a crossing. Somewhere behind, glass carries a small echo of footfalls from a man going back to his berth with a coat over his arm. The dining car holds its square of light and then narrows it for night. The steward hangs the key on its nail in the pantry and leaves the door the way all good doors should be left shut, quiet, patient. The 8th part. High country evening. Air thin and dry enough to keep a promise. The ranger cabin sits in a stand of lodgepole, not grand, square as a boot heel. Shakes on the roof hold their pitch. A stovepipe lifts a slow line that forgets to rise very far. The porch rail shows the smooth shine only elbows can make. A wood box waits by the door, split ends inward, so rain cannot teach them bad habits. Inside, the room is 2 parts work and 1 part sleep. Table under a window, map board on a wall, bunk with a grey blanket tied to its corners. A kerosene lamp lives on the shelf, wick trimmed to a crown that learned this morning what even means. We start with small reckonings. The ranger puts the shovel where the shovel belongs, then the Pulaski axe and mattock in one head on the pegs that keep edges honest. Canteens hang in pairs. A roll of flagging sits clear of mice. The tool chest gets a soft thump, so the drawer thinks to slide easy. On the table the daybook lies open, beside the stub of a pencil tied to itself with twine. He writes a line that favors nouns over opinions. Trail cleared to creek. 2 logs moved. Bridge uprights tight. He dots the date and closes the covers with the heel of his palm. Paper done, now light. The lamp's chimney lifts with a wire the glass answers without complaint. The wick shows a clean rim. He gives it 1 square trim with a small scissor and touches the threads that hold the burner to the fount. Kerosene sits a finger below the line scratched years ago by a man who believed in marks more than memory. A funnel with a handle tied to itself keeps its vow to be present when needed. He wipes the lip with cloth and sets the chimney back with no sound. The match finds the wick, the flame learns roundness and then quiet. The lamp's metal lid warms and forgets to rattle. Light behaves. On the map board a square of varnished plywood holds a paper topography sheet pinned at the corners. Elevation lines make brown music streams run in thin whoosh. At the center, a circle of metal firefinder ring sits over the map. Index marks numbered in degrees. The alidade rides across the circle onto sights and a straight bar. He sets the ring to north with a gentle twist and checks the needle under the glass on the wall true enough for a place where iron learned to stay quiet. He draws a pencil line from cabin to the ridge that needs watching when lightning forgets its manners. The line sits on the map like a sentence the mountain would agree to read. A little before last light he takes the short trail to the hill above the cabin. Boots learn the dust and the dust learns the boots. The path steps between young firs and a few old snags that serve woodpeckers better than they serve lumber. On the hilltop a 4-post platform carries a second firefinder level on turnbuckles. He drops the pack and sets his hands on the table to feel whether level remembers its word. He sights the far ridge through the alidade's front notch, slides the bar to the number the map taught, and checks the bearing with a mental nod. Nothing today, only the long sheep of evening cloud. He records the bearing and the hour and pencils a small circle in the map square where ridges cross ridges. A pencil never pretends to own the scenery. It keeps numbers from wandering. If your attention slips to the tree line and stays there a while, nothing will be lost. The ring will keep pointing north, the pencil mark will wait on the paper. The lamp in the cabin will hold its circle for as long as you step away. Down by the creek, the pack bridge asks for its rounds. To log stringers sit on rock abutments, deck planks ride the stringers, curbs hold the edge, where whose might forget. The ranger runs a hand along the upstream face, feeling for the looseness winter likes to leave. He taps a spike with a light hammer not to drive it, but to hear whether wood and iron keep a single opinion. The sound comes back smooth, no hollow. At the far sill, the sill log has shaved corners where floods tried to teach. He presses a wedge where water chewed and decides it can wait until the weekend. On the deck a plank set proud by a 1/4 inch gets a tap, and to nails that ask for no speeches. He sweeps pine needles from the curbs with the broom he tied from willow and twine, because the store is a long ride and brooms die of pride if men let them. On a cotton line by the creek a canvas feed sack dries. It will come along tomorrow for salt at the patrol cache. He checks the wire on the cache door loop, twist, tail tucked and writes a tiny OK pencil on the inside of the post, where only hands will see it. The box carries a 3-pound coffee tin of nails, a roll of baling wire, a packet of bolts, and a coil of rope long enough for a crossing that needs courage to be routine. Nothing bright, nothing in a box. He asks for miracles. Back at the cabin, the pack string noses the fence. 3 animals, good backs, good feet, patient. The bell mare flicks an ear, the blue roan rubs a cheek on the top rail, and receives a palm on the neck that says stop in a language older than words. He checks cinch rings for wear with thumb, and nail leather wants fat, not just talk. A saddle blanket takes a shake and lands where it teaches the saddle to be kind. He runs a hand between blanket and hair, because hair and blanket must be on speaking terms. Cinch up, breathe, cinch again. No twitch, no hurry. He sets a saw and a coil in the manty, wraps them with duck, ties a diamond hitch by habit and not by show. The rope accepts the form and keeps it. If you rest the eyes here, the animals will not mind. They will crop grass, a bell will note they're wandering, the hitch will keep its shape, and the knot will open when asked and never before. Supper is simple and better for it. Beans warmed on the back of the stove, a biscuit revived with a cup over the steam. Coffee that knows no one will write about it, but everyone will be glad it is there. A pan gets a wipe, a plate gets a wash, a fork cleans in a cup to dry. Coals settle. The stovepipe clicks. He sets the kettle a little off-center, so the water will remember to think, but not insist. At the table he straightens the compass and lays it to one side of the daybook so tomorrow won't have to hunt it. The pencil goes through the loop of twine so gravity will not teach it to leave. Evening rounds the corners of the room. He lifts the lamp down to the table and writes labels on 2 small tins. Tallow, cut nails. The tins go to the shelf where shells once lived, and now live only in stories men tell who were here before the park light rules. He checks the door latch. A hand on the latch tells more about weather than a barometer here. The metal feels a degree warmer than the wall. The wine somewhere above the ridge has changed its course. He notes it with a dot and no word to go with the dot. He prefers dots to adjectives. Night from the porch, stars with kernels in them, not the flat ones you see in town. North Star level with the tail of the spruce that thinks it owns the yard. A bat writes its loops in ink nobody else can read. Somewhere up canyon, a creek finds a stone it had forgotten and starts a new sentence. He sits on the step and pulls at a splinter that has wanted attention for a week and removes it with a look of surprise that he let something so small live so long on the edge of his work. Mid-elevation routine runs through the year with a few repairs that like to repeat themselves. Trailblazes knee paint where sun and snow forgot to be gentle. He lays out the little can's white ground, brown border and a brush trimmed to the right square by scissors. He sets the stencil he cut from canvas years ago. Not because stencil is pretty, because stencil gives the next person the same shade to trust. He paints 3 blazes at a junction that forgets its right from its left in fog. The paint dries in the time it takes to check the culvert below. Gravel has migrated, a shovel brings it back to obedience. Water likes a path, it is kinder if you give it one. At the Halls Ford a wire handline spans between 2 willows for early season crossings. He checks the knots, looks at the bark for scuff that says the wire has been thinking bad thoughts, and then shifts the wrap a hand's breadth lower, where the willow will forgive it. On the far bank a cairn sits with its base right and its crown wrong. He resets the capstone with the heel of his hand and feels the whole stack decide to be less foolish. A small thing, but trails are made of small things or they are not made at all. The radio lives in town. Out here a mirror can talk to noon if someone is looking. He keeps the signal mirror wrapped in a cloth next to the map board. He checks it for scratches that could turn sun into nonsense and finds none. He sets it back and breathes a thank you to whoever chose glass that forgives pockets. At the window a roll of heavy flagging waits for a message he hopes never to send. He does not rehearse messages. He rehearses tying knots without looking so hands will not need eyes if eyes are busy with other truths. Halfway through the dark, a prowler of a cloud crosses the ridge and drops to small rumbles into the far basin. He wakes, sits, reads the room, the knot of light under the lampshade, the black behind the window panes, and chooses quietly. He puts on boots without hunting for socks. Outside the porch the air has gained the weight of rain. He walks to the hill, sets the alidade on its slow turn, and watches the ridge where lightning could find reason. It does not. He writes distant, no column, and returns with the calm of someone who trusts paper and wood, and the way mornings choose to arrive, whether men deserve them or not. If you doze, The ridge will keep its outline for you. The finder ring will be north. When you open your eyes, the stove will hold a handful of heat. The horses will stand just upwind, where they like it. When night considers a change, dawn earns its place without a speech. Light at the east window learns the room. The lamp lowers to a quiet ember, and then goes out wick cut, while warm chimney cord on the nail. The coffee tin gets a shake, a new measure meets water, the blue enamel cup finds its hook. He opens the door and sees the trail as a clean line, from threshold to tree line. He knocks mud from the boot sawless with the stick he keeps for that job, so mud won't take a ride to the ridge, and asks the ridge to care. He refuses to teach messes to travel. Before he leaves for the North Fork, he writes a note on a card and slides it into the crack in the door frame. Gone to Ford back, by dust tool list bearing. A man found in a pinch will read that and understand what to wait for and when to stop waiting. He sets the card with its corner out, so it will be found if it needs to be found and ignored if not. The habit costs seconds and saves days. He checks the pack saddles with one more glance than pride would think he should need. Pride has no job out here. Habits do. He puts a small file in the mantel. Files belong where wire lives. To pieces of bread go into a wax paper with a slice of cheese that will forgive heat. He whispers to the bellmare, and she picks her feet with a dignity that would be comic if it were not earned. The blue roan leans a shoulder into the halter because he likes to make hands useful. The grey looks at the sky and makes a private plan to arrive early. He hands each a mouthful of salt from the palm, not because salt is necessary this morning, because animals should have one good surprise a day and not too many. The cabin door closes with its wooden syllable, a tone you could learn to love. The latch finds its hole and stays. The porch step takes a weight and gives it back. A jay complains from afar, as it always does from afar, and never means much by it. The trail sets its first bend where the bridge's downstream handrail and a wet line halfway up from last month's water. He glances and records without writing. Half a hand lower today, good. He sets his shoulders under the idea of the day and lets the legs walk. By afternoon, the crew from the district will come up with a string to the load of lumber for a new turnpike section below the soggy meadow. A brace will want bolting a sill, will want shimming to crib boxes, will want rock pulled from the creek and laid like a lesson. Nails in the coffee tin will go where they should. The saw will know its strokes. The men will talk in brief, helpful sentences and forget to congratulate themselves. The bridge will move people and animals dry. The meadow will hold water where water belongs. This is the work, and the park will be glad for it without needing to say so. Evening will return, as it does, with a chair on the porch and the map board waiting inside and the lamp asking only for a steady hand. The ranger will write a line to Lyons if the bridge requested that much and set the pencil through the twine. He will hang his hat on the nail that learned his hat's weight years ago and then rested all the same. The stove will think about doing its one job until it does it. The stars will say the names they always say to themselves. The cabin will be the size of the work and not larger. The ninth part. High desert west, the kind that lets a river carve a sentence and then stands back to admire its own quiet grammar. The bridge site wakes before the sun finds colour. Granite piers wear frost like a light coat of manners. Timber falsework holds the river in a lattice that means not yet, but soon. A stiff-legged derrick leans over the near abutment, its guy lines tuned like strings, its boom roped back to a gym pole that trusts the ground. In the tall car, air hoses sleep in spirals by the pit. The rivet furnace remembers yesterday and forgives the cold. Survey first, because steel believes figures more than feelings. A transit comes out of its case, mahogany legs thumping earth, brass level vials set to their small horizons. The instrument man sights a target on the far pier, a round white disc with a black cross, and turns the slow motion screw until the hair meets the cross, and both forget they are separate things. The chainman pulls the steel tape across a run, holds the 0 at a chisel mark into the coping last month, and calls a number without raising his voice. The rodman carries a leveling rod down the cribbing, plants its foot on a benchmark cut into stone, and holds the rod plumb by listening to the bubble rather than staring at it. A book receives the day's first line bearing, distance Temperature because steel grows and men forget paper remembers. Plumb line next. A pier seat shows its anchor bolts. Like teeth, a mason's level rests on a shimpack, while the foreman's hand leans an ounce on one corner and then the other. A plumb bob steps from its leather pocket and sways until the air stops having an opinion. He taps a wedge and watches the bob find the line. He wants the bob, pleased not to be hurried. Gives him the nod only a piece of brass can give. Chalk marks blush on granite to neat crosses where the shoe plates will sit and the truss will sign its name. Back by the furnace, coke gets air. The heater apron thick with yesterday's rust pollen shakes the grate, cracks the blower damper, and stirs the fire with a bar that knows not to complain. Rivets lie like peppermints on a pan, heads domed, shanks cut to a length that came from a table older than the boy who learned it. Tongs in, rivet up, it turns orange in the mouth, yellow at the tip. A small sun that is all work. He spins on his heel and throws 10 feet. No speech. One clean arc into the waiting pan on the staging. The catcher's glove takes it with the soft thud of something that matters landing where it belongs. A drift pin holds the plates in register. A reamer sings one last time. Through the hole, the pin comes out, the hot rivet goes in the holder on it. Sir bucking bar behind, sets it square, and gives the bar the weight of his shoulder. The gunman brings the air gun home, valve feathered, set proud, but not proud enough to teach dents. The gun's hammer stutters into the tail mushrooms, fills the countersink, and settles into a shine that looks like it meant to be that exact shape all its life. You can let your eye rest on the river for a moment. The rivet will still swell into its hole. The bucker will still listen for the solid note that means done. The heater will still turn the wind on the furnace exactly so. Derrick turns. A whistle on the engine gives one long, one short. The hookman flips the choker around a panel brace, slips a timber dog under a sill for balance, and shows the signal with 2 fingers leaning left. The boom swings slow, pendulum controlled by a tagline that runs through a gloved hand like a sentence Hayes memorized. The panel rises from the skid. With a sigh, a man with a pike pole teases the foot clear of an overambitious spike. The boom stops over the shoe plate when the signalman's palm flattens. Down slow. Pinholes meet pinholes, almost by habit, almost. A drift pin makes its vote, known a 2-pound hammer gives a second. The line slackens an inch. The foreman's jaw relaxes, exactly one muscle. The panel, convinced, decides to belong here. Gusset plates lie on a skid, with tags wired to their corners, B3 East top, B3 East bottom, letters that cancel 100 possible mistakes. A layout man, chalk string between thumb and knuckle, snaps a line along a flange where later a lacing bar will live. He checks hole centers with a square and a story stick, not to mistrust the shop, only to tell the steel it was expected to be correct, and thus feels flattered into being so. To bolts go in snug before any rivets, not to hold forever, only to teach the parts how to behave, while heat and air settle the argument. Air comes up along the staging. Hoses run from the compressor car, over a roller, along the catwalk to a T-manifold. Each crew takes a line, bleeds a little water from yesterday, and listens for the dry cough that means the oilers down at the car did their job. The gunman checks his snap clean, free, no bird face. The holder on scrubs the bucking bar with a rag and gives its face a line of chalk so it won't pick up a streak of shame, and put it back on the rivet face without warning. They stand where a man can stand long and well, toes angled, one heel resting, wait on the same work their father's feet learned. Paint lives in a small shaded shack, lead and oil mixed to a red that matches no sunset but keeps rain honest. A painter lifts the lid, stirs from the bottom if memory settle there, and tests a stroke on a piece of scrap. He lays red lead into the shadow side of an eye bar and steps away so dust won't learn to be permanent. He will come back when the sun has done its half of the drying and give the bright side its tone. And later, much later, grey will make promises about years to come. For now, primer stands between weather and pride. Mid-morning, the compressor finds its stride, and the sound turns from a list of moving parts into one unbroken hum. The tallyman sits on a keg and writes rivet counts in a book panel. Row, Count, because later someone will ask how many, and the answer should not be a shrug. A crate of clevis pins arrives on a hand truck from the far bank. The teamster throws the brake with a block under the iron tire and wipes his nose on the back of his wrist. Done. The blacksmith in the field shop rounds the edge of a washer, because a washer that offers a burr will cut someone else's hand tomorrow, and hands are a poor place for burrs. If your attention wants to go soft at the edges, this is a good hour for it. The derrick will keep its slow arc, the hose will keep its breath, the hammer will keep its meter on the gun's tail, and no one will insist you admire it. On the top chord, lacing bars cross in X's and call themselves finished. The boy with the drift carries a bag of drift pins that click against each other like polite silver. He slides one in, turns it once, pulls it, and hands the whole to the heater. The heater throws the orange bright, then another. The bucker's back rounds. His hands find the bar's balance without looking. The gunman's knee rides the web boot heels, find the planks not with a memory that doesn't need eyes. The tail swells, rounds, sits. A proof hammer, the light one, that knows the difference between full and full snaps a few heads, ting solid. Not a bone note among them. Down under the staging, the river takes its time. A clamshell dredge idle near the cofferdam's edge props its bite open. A heron tests the sheep pile lines, if it were a list of decisions, and finds no reason to disagree. A shack on the island crib shows its roof tar, brushed with the same care as if it were church. A man steps out, stretches, and looks uphill to the line of wagons, bringing more angle from the yard. Noon comes as a reasonable suggestion, or than a bell. Lunch pails open on a timber. Bread with last night's leftover meat. A wedge of pie that learned to behave in a tin. A small tin of pickles with a lid that fits. Tin cups drink water from a wooden barrel with a dipper that has never invented the idea of being selfish. A thermos gets shared without ceremony, because the man with the thermos knows the man without it has poured for him when wind came the other way in March. Talk skims low, ream ran true. Painter got his wish, derrick rope wants tar. Wine's going east after 2. Jokes forget their point in favor of the bread. Afternoon sets its shoulder. On the far bank, the cantilever's arm reaches out over green water. A long hand that keeps its own promise 1 inch at a time. The traveller, a crab frame on rollers, carries a hoist and a gang along the top chord. Below, men with pike poles help the panel drop its last inch onto splices and bearers that were not expected to fail and do not. A big pin goes in cold oiled, eased with a bar, encouraged with a sledge in sober strokes. A drift pin waits in the backup hole like a good neighbor. The pin drives, a keeper slides home, a smile gets shaved off a mustache with a thumb, almost invisible. The expansion bearings at the abutments ask for a different courtesy. A rocker seat, machined flat, meets a sole plate with brass set screws that listened to a level yesterday and will not forgive foolishness today. A man with a long wrench turns a screw a quarter, listens to the plate's little creak as the load settles. He touches a feeler gauge at the edge and nods. A sliver of lead slips under a toe to hush a proud spot. A chalk line down the web says, here not prose, not poetry, just here. If you drift, nothing loud will call you back. The crews prefer it that way. A bridge grows quieter as it nears its own idea of completion. Toward 3. The wind gets its way on the boom. The signalman points to his hat brim. The engine man eases the drum. The boom slows 4 breaths and then resumes. The tagline man moves his hand half an inch to the right, and the load obeys in feet, because loads are eager to be taught if the teacher doesn't think Hay's making a speech. A plumb line checks the web 1 degree. Then lest the drift goes back in to persuade, the rivet goes in to finalize persuasion. By late afternoon, the last panel of the day belongs. The field crew snaps chalk along the splices to mark the rows they will close tomorrow. The painter lays his brush into the last dry plate. 1 direction, 1 coat, no drama. The heater banks the coke, shuts the blower, lays the bar across the doors to tell boys who might think of mischief not yet. The compressor man drains the low point trap. The hose ends get hung on their pegs, so fittings will not sleep in grit. A broom sweeps the staging plank snails, filings. a lost washer into a pan that will return those things to the Cofferton School of Second Chances. Sleep safe note, gently. If your eyes lower now, the river will keep its place and the red rock will hold dusk like a pot holds water. The last rivet head will call whether you witness it or not. Evening turns the canyon's geometry soft. The derrick's boom writes a calm arc against a sky that prefers understatement. On the far pier a lamp comes up behind a bit of canvas, a warm coin that tells boots where to step back across a run. The survey crew packs the transit and touches the case latched. It's not superstition, rehearsal. The clerk in the tall car closes the book on a figure 4 rivets burned and pin set, draws a single line under the last number, and sets the pencil in a notch that only that pencil knows. Up on the roadway between chords, a man taps 12 rivets with the proof hammer, exact, and lets his wrist remember the pitch that equals good. He finds one that sings nearly honest, sets a hotter rivet tomorrow note by the head with a sliver of soapstone, and keeps his small pride to himself. Pride is allowed, but in this place it prefers to dress in plain clothes. Down at the abutment, a case of red lead gets a lid pressed by a hand that knows not to slam. The brush sits in oil that can goes under the bench. A bucket of drift pins collects drifts in like a host who knows everyone's name. The blacksmith rakes ashes from a portable hearth into a shovel and dumps them where rain will teach them not to fly. The foreman writes 3 words on a slate and props it where morning will see. Pins at B7. The river says its old thing at the foot of the piles. A caddish drift moves along the eddy line, the way a tally moves down a page. Bats shoulder the air under the boom. The compressor rests. One last hiss from a valve to announce grudges are over. Men step down the timber stair to the island, then to the shore. Boots finding ladder rungs without looking because looking all day has earned a rest. Night wishes the bridge well by being ordinary. Camp lamps bloom at the cook car, pan clatters in a way that comforts more men than the pan could name. A coffee pot finds its boil twice and then is lifted once, so it won't find a third habit, not genius. The recipe for beans stays what it was yesterday and will be tomorrow. A promise to stomachs and to a page in a ledger that says provision sound. Somebody strings a fiddle for 10 minutes and then strings it back into its case without audience. The tall car door slides shut. The lockers learn to agree with the key instead of provoking it. The derrick's boomline creaks once and decides to go quiet because the wind stepped behind the ridge and stayed there. Plans live on drawing boards, but bridges live in hands and small routines. Tomorrow, the traveller will nose farther out. The pins will be warmed and eased and driven, and the chalk lines will fade under red lead that tells rain to reconsider. A train will cross a year from now, with the quiet surprise of something large being asked to behave and deciding to do so. The river will keep talking under it. The men will have left their names in pencil inside a tall chest or in the way a line of rivet heads catches blue hour like coins in a pocket. Patient and unremarkable. The 10th part. Main Street before sunrise wears lamp glass breath on its windows and a faint smell of coal from somewhere to doors down. The print shop is already warm. The stove in back keeps a steady pulse. The front windows remember yesterday's headlines in backwards ghost letters on the glass where ink once met a careless rag. Inside, the stone is a flat, black table big as a bed and colder than the street. To cases of typeset open upper and lower little square compartments labelled with a patient logic. E, T, A thick with sorts J, Q thin like a whisper. The foreman hangs his cap on a nail and puts the composing stick in his left hand, the way years taught him, thumb against the screw that sets the measure. 12's piker for body, a headline wants 20, but not today. He sets the stick to column width and lets habit do the rest. Copy first. It comes folded from the telegraph desk next door, thin, onion skin sheets with penciled marks and a few words written by a hand in a hurry. He weights the sheet under a small slug of lead, reads the first line under his breath, and starts to set, letter by letter from the lowercase, thumb pushing type along the stick so it clicks against the composing rule. Each piece a small piece of metal with its face backward to the world and right way to the mind. A thin lead slips between lines 2 points to give air and good manners. Quads at the end M or 2M to fill just so. He never sizes with knives, he sizes with letters and blank space the way a cook sizes with salt. A devil the boy who runs before the sun does brings yesterday's forms from the rack and tips pied type into the hell box. The box doesn't mind its name, is a square wooden mouth that eats a day's mistakes and gives them back to order when someone with time sorts and returns each letter to its home. The boy's fingers are quick, he knows G belongs where G belongs and never up high. He wipes his hand on his apron and thinks about the smell of ink that never leaves the room. That sweet, iron smell that feels like work and winter at once. If your attention slips toward the window where dawn is thinking itself into being, the line will still build, the leads will lie straight, and the stick will hold its measure without any drama. Galleys take their load lines slid from the stick with the galley slip. Nicks all facing so words behave, a tie of string around the end, so slugs cannot go for a walk on their own. A galley proof asks for ink. He wheels the little hand roller through a thin ribbon on the ink slab, lamp black and oil, warmed with a breath, rolls gently across the type until the faces glisten, lays a sheet of proofing paper and pulls it with a steady lift. The first proof always lies. He sees to transposed letters and one lead that thinks it is a letter. The bodkin lifts a bad sort, the tweezers bring the right one home, and the lead goes back to being air where it should. A second pull, cleaner. He marks a comma where sense wants a comma, then tapes the proof to the copy with a pin, so the editor can lay his pencil down later, and the printer can defend his choices to himself. The imposing stone wants its work now. He lays the chaser, square iron frame on the stone, and starts to build the page. Furniture, wooden blocks of various lengths slide in around the columns, making polite rectangles of nothing to hold the somethings in place. The coins go last, to steel wedges and the key. He tightens each with his right hand, while his left tips a forefinger to each corner of the type. The forefinger tells you, before your eye does, where the pressure has turned impatience into a bulge. He wraps the face gently with the planer to settle the form, touches the coin key a breath more, pulls a frisket sheet over the form and runs a nail around the edge to coax the paper into respect. A few hair spaces find a home where a line wanted to whisper into alignment. It all makes the peculiar music of letterpress, planing knocks, coin clicks, the almost sigh of paper. Inking is a separate language. The big hand-press Colombian iron, eagle on the counterweight that will never fly, waits by the window where light is good. He dresses the tympan, taut oiled cloth stretched over the frame. Make ready under it thin bits of tissue pasted where impressions proved shy. A secret map of paper that gives the page 10,000 tiny kindnesses. Gauge pins sit where the sheet will land, tiny brass fences a sheet can trust with its edges. He sets the frisket stout paper frame cut away where type will touch and left solid where margins must stay clean. Inches and centuries stack in this one machine. Nothing is new and nothing is antique. It is simply correct. Ink sits on the disc like a dark lake. The roller carriage lifts and falls as he pulls it, to composition rollers turning, rising over the ink disc, gathering, then descending to kiss the type, not slobber on it. He reaches with his left hand to the bar and swings the platen in, with his right sheet laid. Frisket down, tympan up, bar pulled steady. The press answers with a firm, even pressure that lives in its bones, then releases. The sheet comes away, the black shines, the hairlines keep their hair, and the page breathes. You can rest your focus halfway here. The press will continue to do what presses do when guided by hands that prefer quiet. The editor arrives with a pencil behind his ear and a coffee. Reads standing, marks a small correction, mill rate to mill rate. A hyphen that wandered and should have known better. He smiles at a line about the depot improvements because it names a man who came asking after himself last week. He nods at the obituaries, never unkindly, and leaves a proof on the string with a pin. Was agreed long ago. He will return to his desk in the front window and write a short line about the weather that will be wrong and will offend no one. Weather always writes its own article. The Job presser Gordon with a flywheel and a platen that opens and shuts like an eyelid takes envelopes between the news runs. The boy feeds them one by one to receive a return address at the corner. The clamp's set to kiss, not smash. He has learned the rhythm foot on treadle. Slip the sheet, watch the jaws, pull the printed piece, stack it face up, hands staying shy of the mouth, the way men do when they mean to keep all their fingers another year. A slip sheet every 20 envelopes keeps ink from telling the next sheet a story it doesn't need. At the back, a man cuts paper on the guillotine. He sets the back gauge with the crank, brings the clamp down with a foot, and lets the knife fall long even arc, the hiss of steel through stacks, the bump of the stop when it lands. Off kids fall, square, and go to the kindling box, or to be torn into scratch pads the town will never thank him for, but will always use. The paper for the edition is on a dolly ream after ream wrapped in brown. He opens each with a knife that has been taught the edge of its own ambition. Only the paper, the fingers, never the ream beneath. He fans the stack, lifts it to the feedboard of the press with a stick under to save his back. A pan of water with a sponge sits at his elbow to wipe dust from edges without wetting anything that mines water. If your eyes close and reopen 2 minutes later, nothing will be lost. The roller will still climb and fall, the tympan will still hold its taut truth, the gauge pins will still wait like little harbour lights. When the form for page 1 is locked, they pull a full proof, hang it on the wall, and someone from the front cackles something that is not criticism so much as tradition. Then the form goes to press. The foreman and the boy lift it by the chase, set it into the bed, pull the bearers to meet the rails, and slide the frisket and tympan frame into their hinges. The first impression is thick in the center. He expected that. He opens the tympan, lifts the sheet, maps the crush to the make ready, and opens a drawer that holds tissue thin as breath. He tears bits with the tip of a fingernail and pastes them under, only here and there, teaching the press to give the center what it owes. Second pull, better. Third, even. He sets the stack. The press will now run like a clock that someone loves. Delivery begins in bundles. The folder sits near the front, a hand-fed device that creases, then turns, then creases again. A woman feeds sheets one edge first, out come halves, then quarters. She counts by sixes with a finger that barely moves, ties with cotton string, and lays each bundle in a crate stenciled with the names of stores and farms. The names are their own geography. A dray will carry these bundles. A boy will jump down at each post office window and leave a bundle and take a look at a calendar girl and leave quick as a cheek can learn to blush. The mail clerk from the back room arrives with 2 pouches. He sets them open on the table and ticks towns off a list. The printer wraps the labeled stacks with paper sleeves and slips them in, then draws the drawstring and sets the brass lock. The number on the lock finds a line on the clerk's card. The clerk lifts the pouches and goes out whistling a bit of a tune that thinks it is someone else's tune and is not. The card goes in a pocket that thinks of itself as a ledger. A lull. He wipes the ink disc with an ink knife, cutting what remains to a thin crescent, then removes the rollers, sets them on their cradle, and wipes them with a rag dampened with a little kerosene, never too much, or the glue in the composition will sulk. The slab takes a scrape. The knife rides the glass like a skate. He oils the carriageways with a drop from a long-spouted can and rolls the bed to check for stutter. There is none. He pinches the coin key with a cloth so his palm doesn't learn a handle of lead on a winter day. If drowsiness takes you for a short walk, the shop will welcome you back without reproach. Letters will remain letters. The chase will keep its hold. The press will stay ready with its patient bone and iron. Afternoon sees handbills for the fair. Would type on a broadside big letters with personality, carved edges that give a poster a voice in town, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough here to set. He picks the miz with 2 hands. Wood is friendly in the hand it sets on the stone with furniture, like alphabet carpentry. Ink on a brayer, roll, lay, pull those letters, speak in their own timber voice. The press laughs under the weight. He hangs a few on a string to dry and turns the string a little so sunlight won't teach one side jealousy. In the side room, a treadle stitcher binds pamphlets 2 holes, thread through with a needle that pulls the knot tight without drawing blood. A woman squints into late day and whispers the number she needs to write on the cover. quietly so numbers don't feel pestered. She stacks 10s into 20s and taps the edges square. It is not grand work. It is exactly the right size for a day. Near closing, distribution begins the other way. Distribution of type. Back to cases. DS back to dis. BS back to BS. Ms to M. Thin spaces to thin. The foreman's fingers fly. 3 letters at a time. The tweezers hovering, but unused, because the hand knows its lanes. The hell box empties a little, the sharp iron clacks less. The stone clears, wiped with a rag that knew red ink last month and knows black today. The chase goes to the rack, the coins drop in a drawer that will last longer than any man in the room. The stove's last charge settles. He lays a kettle on its lid to fill the second day of snow, telling jokes in the stovepipe. A broom learns the path around the press feet and the front boards, where customers will step clean in the morning. He wipes the window with vinegar water, inside only, to take ghost letters away from tomorrow's sun. He sets the composing stick on the hook above the lower case, not the upper, and smiles at his own strictness. He pinches the lamp out at the front, leaves the one by the stone burning, while he turns the key on the side door, then returns and lowers the wick until the chimney is a single breath of light. If you nod now, the form will wait. The tympan will keep its quiet tension, and the lead will cool to the same soft grey it wore when morning began. The 11th part. A city block wrapped in brick and wire, the kind that breathes a little when the streetcar goes by. The telephone exchange lives on the 2nd floor above a quiet storefront stairs. Carry the days, dust up in small script, the mop will erase by morning. Inside, the room is long, warm, and kept dim on purpose. A line of switchboards faces a wall of jacks rows and rows, a tidy orchard of holes, each jack a house, a shop, a wharf office, a hotel desk, a night watchman's stall. In front of every operator's seat, a shelf for a pad and pencil, a pair of cords with brass-tipped plugs, a set of keys and rings, and the little supervisory lamps that say what they mean without ever raising their voices. The night chief tests the clocks, 2 on the wall and 1 in his pocket. He sets his pad on the ledge where the order wire lives, writes the date with the flick of a wrist, and pulls the stools an inch from the board so skirts and knees can breathe. The room smells of dust that has been taught manners, insulators that remember varnish, and the faint, clean acid tang from the battery room to doors down. He straightens the name cards on the strip that runs above the Jackfield Main 3X, River 4X, Depot to XX, small paper flags that keep fingers from guessing when minds are tired. He lifts a receiver from its hook for one breath to hear the line fine tone. The soft C that means power is where power should be. He nods to no one. Work sits ready. The board is common battery, so bells sleep until the exchange tells them to wake. Lamps are the eyes. When a subscriber lifts a handset, a lamp by the jack glows a small coin, nothing more. An operator's fingers move. She plugs the answering cord into that jack, presses the key, and speaks in a tone learned from a steady ant. Number, please. The reply comes in the soft drawl of the paying town, or a clipped yes from a hotel clerk, or a whisper from a night nurse who needs a line to a doctor across the river. The operator's right hand has already run to the called numbers jack. The calling plug slips home. The ring key taps one burst for most lines. To for a magneto party, past the last trolley pole, and the supervisory lamps tell the story in 2 lights, both lit while ringing. One dark when the far end answers, both dark when the talk begins. This is a grammar anyone can learn. They prefer careful instruments to surprises. If your attention eases the focus here, lamp, plug, soft voice, the board will not take offense. Lines will still meet, lamps will still dim when they should, and the pencil on the pad will rest its point without falling. On the test desk at the end position, a different set of tools, a jack strip marked test, a plug on a heavy cord, a meter that measures what can be measured and keeps quiet about the rest. The desk owns a bridge of resistances that lets a hand find a leak to ground or a break in a loop by the way a needle lies to the left or to the right. A shelf holds cards, trouble tickets, thin rectangles that carry a number, a time, and a word like faint, no ring, clicks. The chief lays one on the rubber mat. River 418 howler at 2310. He lifts the test cord, touches the line, and listens. A thin whistle, yes. He writes prop. Wet cap, sets the card in a clip, and taps the order wire key. A quiet line that runs to the outside crew. Lineman morning. River 418 pole 12 howler. Bring a new condenser. A short click at the other end means the shop will remember. The battery room breathes with jars. Thick glass cells sit into ranks. Lead plates like book pages. Acid no higher than a barber's comb laid flat. A float on a rod painted red shows height without asking for a nose. Too close to acid. The charger hums motor. Belt. Dynamo its brushes trimmed to a line. A man touches the commutator with a stick of graphite and leaves a mark that means I looked. On the wall the ringing machine turns. A small motor with a gear train and a cam, making the town's ringing current in soft little hills. 20 cycles per second, polite as a metronome. A spare machine lives next to it, oiled, ready. A neighbor who will step in without being asked to brag. Back on the board, a firehouse line flashes twice and waits. The operator answers in the tone the chief taught for stations: simple, respectful, central. The captain orders a call to an alderman's house. The operator rings once, pauses twice, the way that house prefers to be roused. A sleepy voice answers chords. Sit lamps confess their changes. No sirens, no fret. Paper receives a short note. 23:30 to capt. Snow to Ald, read. The note is not their business, and yet it is. Paper is how a room like this ensures it will not have to invent its past from memory. A long-distance trunk asks for attention. The long lamp in the trunk bay glows and holds. The long line operator in the city beyond says ready for river to 154 Asheville standing by. The night chief takes the trunk cord, jacks into the bay, and answers with the town name and the time. He pages the number across 3 boards, one hand, 2 fingers. A bell that is not a bell has a small note under the work. River 254 answers. The doctor's house, someone breathless at the far end says yes, and the chief ties river, Asheville, and the doctor together with 3 pairs and the habit of neatness. He lowers his voice to the volume the night likes and marks a start in the long distance ledger for billing. Asheville 3 minute. At 23:44, he will pencil the finish later, and the girl in the morning will not have to guess whether the doctor argued with the clock. If you lose the thread for a minute and watch the clock hand past the half, these chords will still hang in correct arcs. The lamps will still be the color of tea. The voices will still be no louder than a hand across a tabletop. Operators move with the economy of people who learn to avoid reaching twice for one thing. A pad receives a name, a wrist returns a plug to its rest, a ring key wakes a bell with the short pulse. A farmer 3 miles out knows how to tell from his neighbors. On the rural party line jacks in the lower bay, a row of selectors sits with small screw heads peeking. The chief checks that the proper letter code card is clipped above to short, one long for the blacksmith, long, short for the Grange. He has heard every argument that party lines ever caused and forgot them all the same day they were made. Tonight only hands matter. Midnight brings the slow parade of calls that make a town work when stores are shut. A hotel desk asks for a taxicab stand. The operator knows their number without glancing and ties one to the other almost without motion. A night watchman calls the warehouse to ask if the inspector has finished a fishing boat. Up the slough signals the chandlery for rope and lamp chimneys. A nurse calls the druggist. The druggist answers from a little bed on the floor under the counter and says, "Be there in 10. The operator smiles and makes no note. Not everything has to become paper. The chief walks the line, listening for the little sins chords that hang too low, where plugs can learn to bruise keys that have not been polished and make a scratch where a smooth should be lamps whose caps have become dim from dust. He removes, wipes, returns. He pauses at the end board and cleans the rubber of the headband on a receiver. With a damp cloth, old rubber crumbles, cloth answers discipline. Behind the panels, the relay rack ticks like dignified rain. Tiny armatures move and rest. A group of lightning arresters sits above the entry cable, Their gaps set, a little dust on the porcelain gets a brush and then a nod. Some work loves being noticed, but hates being praised. If sleep tugs, let it have an inch. The board will keep a yard of order for you. A supervisory lamp that should drop when a receiver returns will drop, one that fails will remain lit. And a hand will clear it with a key and write a small card to the morning troubles crew. The room's job is to make the difference between care and rest, so small you can cross it half asleep. Out on the pole line, two men in wool coats follow a lantern along the alley. A splice case near the bakery has collected last week's sleet water, found its own school, and learned enough to be troublesome. The men lift the case, lay out the pair's colours in old cloth codes that require a mouth to say them and a finger to repeat. Red on green, white on slate, blue on red. They cut back insulation, twist, solder with a pencil iron heated in a gasoline blow lamp that hisses like a comb snake. Then wrap with rubber and a canvas tape. Then paint the whole with a brush of black compound that keeps rain from pretending to be invited. They set the case, tie it with two bands and a rule of thumb that belongs to someone older and absent. They knock snow from the pole step and walk, the lantern steady, the alley shorter on the return. Inside, the order wire clicks once, line 5 quiet now. The chief flips the test key and hears it, quiet like a pond. He writes cleared 118 on the card and tucks it in the finished slot. He whistles to notes into his teeth, no song anyone will remember, not meant for remembering. There are niceties to this craft. A call that has lasted longer than 20 minutes gets a soft ring at the called party one, then nothing, then one again, just a reminder to check if help is still needed. A line that falls suddenly gets a re-invite after 2 breaths, in case a handset slipped. If it doesn't return, the lamp is cleared with the key and a card goes to the rack. The long-distance ledger takes a red slash at the hour because someone in a bigger room, in a bigger city, will count those slashes when the sun is up. And it is easier to make a pile of slashes when you have not been asked to invent them. Toward 2, the office settles into its deeper quiet. A cat that belongs to no one and to everyone pads across the bare boards behind the last position and finds the coil of a cord to sit on. The operator strokes its back once without looking away from the board. The cat remains exactly where cords have learned to survive. On the shelf near the window, a pot of philodendron toward the night street lamp. A saucer under it holds 2 teaspoons of water. The chief has the habit of adding 1 teaspoon on Tuesdays and 1 on Fridays. Plants enjoy rules as much as instruments do. The battery man makes his slow walk again, checks the temperature in the room with a small glass tube and a list, and writes 62 on a card with the date. He listens to the charger's belt for a hiss that would mean a thread has gone rough. It hasn't. He puts the back of his hand near the bearings and feels the warmth that has never harmed anyone. He returns to his stall and reads the pages of a manual he knows already: brush spring pressure, armature balance, contact finger adjustments, because manuals ask for an audience, and he is the one the room offers. If you are drifting, the soft ring of a magneto out on a party line will pull you back like a gentle palm on the shoulder, and then let you go again. The operator will answer, will call, will wait. The patient lamps will narrate without commentary. Near 3, the long-distance trunks go com. The chief checks the call meter, winds its clockwork with the key, and touches the paper roll where penciled minutes leave their spore. He draws a single line under the last entry and lays the pencil down at 4 o'clock on the pad, an angle that means finished for now. He looks down the board hats hung on chair backs, hands at rest. One operator mending the edge of a cuff with 3 inconspicuous stitches while waiting for a lamp to confess a need. Quiet in a room like this is not empty. It is full of readiness that costs years to cultivate. Dawn begins with the bakery calling the milkyard, the milkyard calling the driver who slept near his horses, the driver calling the grocer calling the man who has the key to the side door, because the main door will be opened later, when the town is properly awake. A rooming house asks for the depot to learn if the eastbound ran on the dot. A nurse calls the clerk at the hotel to ask if 2 rooms can be made 1 with an extra cot. The operator says she will ask and then does. And papers do not have to carry such a small thing, because it was carried in a voice with care, and that is enough. The morning shift arrives with coats buttoned up to the throat and hair pinned under headsets. The night gives its notes. 1 trouble card left 4 line to 113 scratching wind. Lightly loose drop 1 trunk a shade slow booster checked. Okay now to party line quarrels diffused without needing to ask anyone to be ashamed. The night chief hands the test desk key to the day chief, the way a man hands a plane to another carpenter. Handle first, with a word that says nothing about ownership and everything about trust. The last act is small. He turns the order wire key and says, "Good morning." In 4 districts, 4 other rooms answer with the same 2 words, and the room stands for a breath as if the sentence were enough. You can let the picture thin to lines here. The cords will be coiled. The lamps will rest until a finger lifts a receiver in a kitchen across town. The battery will go on breathing, and the board will have made what it always makes rooms touch rooms, quietly, on time. The 12th part. Headland toward evening, the kind that holds ocean on one side and grass on the other, and takes both seriously. The tower rises out of rock like a well-made tall, whitewash even, windows in a line, lantern glass above like a watch crystal. The keeper's house sits shouldered in behind it with a porch that has seen every weather this coast keeps in stock. Gulls make their usual opinions along the wind. The surf below works its own meter against ledge and pocket. Up in the watchroom, the door latch has the habit of closing with a decent click. The brass key lives on a nail exactly where it did yesterday. We start in the oil room before the light. Tin butts sit against the wall, kerosene. Marked and dated funnels with gauze screens hang from pegs. The floor wears sand and a broom line that means no spills where flame travels. The keeper lifts a can by its bail to hands, not to be dramatic, to be careful, and tips it to a measure can, then caps both. His hand knows the weight without a scale. Enough for the night, and a little grace besides. He wipes the funnel lip with a clean rag that never wipes anything else, and sets the rag in the pail marked oil only. Habits live in pails, they are more faithful there than on lips. The staircase winds like a rope that grew into stone. Treads show the mild shine from sawless and buckets at each landing. A window gathers air the color of water. In the watchroom, he sets the can on a wooden pad, no metal on glass. No glass on metal, and opens the lantern door's brass hasp. The lamp carriage sits under the lens. A 4-wick burner with a gallery bright from yesterday's care, a reservoir that remembers being emptied and filled between sunsets. He fills it slow, straining through the gauze, stops shy of the brim, and taps the side so bubbles learn to leave. He trims each wick with the small scissor flat. Square, then smooths the cut with a finger wrapped in cloth, so the flame tonight will find an edge like a ruler. The lens is a cathedral built on thrift. Prisms ring the crown, and baseball's eyes face the horizon like patient eyes. He checks the clips that hold each piece, not because glass forgets, because time does when people encourage it. A soft cloth with whiting chalk and water circles, never back and forth, never with the grit that lives in careless pockets. Salt kisses from last week get lifted, the glass gives back a quiet brightness that needs no compliments. He wipes the brass with a rag that belongs to brass and nobody else, and sets the rag away the way a man folds a map he respects. If your attention drifts to the grey band where sea meets sky, the wick will still be even, the oil will still find its level, the lens will keep its clean face. None of it asks to be watched to behave. Clockwork next. The weight hangs in the central well, a neat iron stack on a cable that ran right yesterday and will run right tonight if shown how. He fits the crank to the square on the winding shaft and walks it, not hurried, not lazy, hand over hand, counting half rotations under his breath to feel the lift. The governor flies to brass balls on arms settle into their small circle. He tests the escapement with a finger, the pallets tick, the teeth answer, neither minding the finger, both minding the rule. A card on a nail says the flash interval. This lens should show once every 12 seconds, 2 seconds bright, 10 dark. He sets the shutter clock to agree with that card, because cards are promises between men who will be here and men who will come after. Sun is a thumb width from the horizon when the lantern learns its duty. match struck and pinched, flame tipped to the wick, for wicks take the fire, each at a low, even breath, so heat will not teach glass impatience. He watches the blue for a minute, that first cold color, that has not yet decided to be light, and then trims the flame to wine, and then to honey. He closes the gallery door, checks the draft at the ventilators enough to carry smoke, not enough to bully flame, and eases the lantern door shut. The lens gives the first pane of light to a gull and a fisherman and a man in a small house who looks up for reasons that have nothing to do with ships. The clockwork engages, the lens begins to turn, a slow, repeated courtesy to the horizon. He writes in the log on the shelf under the window, lighted at 450 to wind W by S, moderate swell long and low barometer 29.98 and steady. He does not write how the evening smells tar, salt, a little fish, because the log prefers facts that can be compared to last year's and the year before. He sets the glass chimney shade where sun might find the lens in the morning, rolled and tied, its edge not touching prism. The watchroom's barometer gets an extra glance and a slight touch to the brass ring that marks tonight's reading against tomorrow's. Fogg asks for different work. The bell house sits on the lower platform, iron frame, bell big as a barrel, striker on a cam. The motion comes from a small clockwork in a cast iron box weight, drum, escapement, just like a patient cousin of the lens machine. He winds it, checks the leather on the hammer face soft enough not to bruise, firm enough not to lie, and sets the interval lever to the card. In Fogg single stroke every 15 seconds. He tests it once, boom, deep and slow, and lets it rest. The boom walks the cliff, steps down the stair of water, and goes away without apology. This coast ships know that note they fold it into their own decisions. If you doze for a while, the light will carry on its rounds, the bell will keep its count, the weight will step down the shaft with the same human patience it has had for a dozen winters. Midnight passes like an unrolled map starts, the slow wash, the light's quiet arithmetic. He climbs, trims the flame with the snuffer that looks like a tiny, deliberate spoon, and lifts a smudge of char that thought about forming. He wipes the gallery hinge, touches the clock shaft for a heat not warm, good, and listens for a squeak that would ask for a drop of oil and a note in the book. No squeak tonight. In the far, a steamer shows masthead and port and starboard. The light catches her wheelhouse windows every 12 seconds, and the wheelhouse does not mind. A fisherman's dory slides in the lee of the kelp line, head bent, all set in a rhythm anyone could nap against. He keeps the lens upright and the wick square. That is what keeper means in rooms like this. Down in the house, the second keeper pours coffee from a blue enamel pot and leaves a cup at the foot of the stair, because cups at the foot of stairs teach good nights. He steps outside to check the weather line on the porch post, where last storm reached, and this one will not. He listens to a buoy speak its own small pronoun from the outer shoal. Back in the house, he mends a coat pocket with wax thread, the needle riding the seam like a quiet boat. The kitchen clock gains a minute, and he sets it back without scolding. A loaf under a towel finds its own dice roll in the yeast and expands toward morning. There is heat in the range brick. There is no hurry in any of it. Toward 2, mist sobers the horizon. He steps to the bell house, moves the lever, and the striker takes up its regular politeness. 1 note, wait, 1 note, wait. He checks the weight line, no phrase, the pull is free, the hammer pins greased in October, and still willing. Back at the lens, he notes a thin halo forming on the lantern glass where breath met cold. He wipes in a circle inside the allowed part of the pane. Outside, he leaves the salt beef for morning. He turns the wick down a hair because Fogg makes night look close and the flame does not need to brag about its work. A passing schooner calls a single short on her horn. He answers with the bell. Not a conversation, an exchange of facts. He writes Fogg to 10. Bell started. Schooner stood SE. He enjoys writing the letter S because the pen understands it. His hand returns the pen to the notch where pens live. The notch is bare, wood, no ink lives there to teach pen's rudeness. In the small hours, the light is mostly company to itself. The clock weight bottoms. He puts a shoulder to the crank and brings it home again. He glances at the governor. arms at the same lazy angle. As the last time he touches the flying nut, no need to change speed. The timing on the card is still true. He sets the service lamp on the shelf, a small, simple wick burner ready to slip in if the main flame there misbehaves. It has misbehaved twice in 8 years. He remembers the dates, both in January. He remembers the smell when the gallery called. He remembers that quiet is more useful than panic anywhere oil and fire live together. If your eyes sink and open later, the lens will be in a different position and the sea the same. And that is the scale this room prefers. Dawn pulls color back into the headland and then into the lens, a little backward rainbow that learned this trick from men who made glass behave like mathematics. He turns the wick down and out, waits for the last blue to leave, opens the gallery and lifts each wick to square again, wipes a faint flock of soot from the chimney, leaves the ventilators parted for the heat to go on out. He drops the curtain around the lens canvas on a frame that keeps the sun's bite off prisms and spares them the indignity of magnifying a careless match or a flash of a passer's mirror. He cranks the weight back up and leaves the escapement free, as the lens will revolve at rest, a low-duty stretch that keeps bearings honest. Morning is four hands and whiting. The glass speaks when cloth circles it right, it quiets when the job is done. Brass gets its little kiss from rouge. The bass ring understands this language and does not ask for more. Downstairs, the clockwork gear train gets 1 drop of oil where brass meets steel, not 10 drops, not just in case. He looks at the pinion teeth through a magnifying glass he once used for stamps. Teeth where impairs, the glass tells impairs are content. He closes the box and sets the screwdriver back into the slit cup for it in the lid, not anywhere else where mist would find it. He takes the weather at 8 by the book, dry bulb, wet bulb, wind on a small card dial that lives outside. See state on a list borrowed from sailors. He writes a line without adjectives, the day will be grateful. He sends a flag up the staff at the district, asked for 1 square red, when wind in the afternoon pretends to use its hands to flags if someone in town should think to secure a shutter. Most days the flag lives in its bag and enjoys retirement. Once a week he walks the iron rail of the gallery with a bucket and a brush. Salt writes its own newspaper on glass and metal. He edits it without taking offense. He checks the sash putty with his thumb. It holds its small shape. This truth will not appear in any report, but it will make the work easier in winter. The lantern door latch takes a dab of graphite from a stub kept in the pocket behind the hat pegs. The latch moves like a good line in a sentence, true, small, sufficing. Midday, the tender boat comes in under the lee of the point and a line goes up the derrick for oil and a crate of lamp chimneys wrapped in straw. The hoist runs on a hand winch. He puts one hand on the crank and the other on the brake and sends the box to the landing halfway, pass it through. No knocks on glass. No hold your breath then to the watchroom. He signs a receipt on a pad. The tender keeps and nods at a joke he has heard twice a year for 14 years. The joke enjoys being nodded at more than being laughed at. That is how jokes behave among people who keep clocks for a living. Afternoon is for paint where paint needs to exist. Handrail stripe, door sill freshened, stair tread that tried to rust from the edges inward. He sands with paper that knows the difference between smoothing and flattening. He lays paint thin stays. Thick pretends to last, and then shows its true mind in scales. He leaves the brush on a nail between coats, bristles wrapped in paper. He scrapes the rim clean and sets the lid down so it will not be found as a circle of trouble next spring. Evening returns, and with it the same motions in a different day. Oil measured, wick trimmed lens, checked clock wound log written. The bell may rest tonight or not, he will not argue. A boy from the village may walk up the path to look through the watchroom door. While the lamp is being set, the boy will say nothing and the keeper will say little, and both will leave satisfied that lights are lights and nights are nights, and men can be friends with both in a room where things are kept. If you need to slip under for a while, the flash will still move across the water and back, the bell will still lay its slow note into fog. The book will still be waiting for the small entry that says what was done and when. Morning can meet you where you left it. The 13th part. City edge, A block of brick with high doors and numbers painted large enough for fog to read. The car barn keeps night inside like a careful pocket. Rails go in under the lintels, 2 and 4 and 6 together, and the floor between them swept to the color of old coins. A clock over the foreman's desk listens to itself. In back, a bench with oil cans and a vice that has held 1,000 small arguments, but never raised its voice. Out beyond the fence, the feeder line hums a low, even thought. We begin where first trips always begin. Lamps checked, poles roped down, shoes greased, air ready. A motorman steps up a wide iron tread and sets his lunch pail on the dash shelf, because that is where lunch pails go when cars are not moving. His hand finds the trolley base cast iron, spring strong but polite. He lifts the rope, lets the pulleys back, and checks the shoe. A steel wheel with a little hollow worn on it. A finger of graphite rubbed along its track learns the day. He rolls the pole wheel in his palm. Once it answers with a whisper that promises no surprises at frogs. The rope takes 3 turns on the cleat, not 2. Not far enough for weather, not enough for tangles. He glances at the air gauge. The compressor in the truck below turns to life with a measured chuff-chuff that makes the brake line stand up straighter. Inside, the conductor unlocks the fare box with a key that would look like a key, and to a man who never loved keys. He checks the billets nickel and copper. Paper rolls neat, then locks the lid and tugs once. Not because he doubts metal, because metal prefers to be reminded of its work the way people do. He pulls the roll sign, 1 click from Barnes to River Avenue. The canvas rolling like a little stage curtain behind glass. He swings the step-well gate and lets it fall back into place. The hinge learned quiet last week and kept it. On each seat a brass grab post gleams from a rag, and a tin of polish that has never volunteered to help anywhere else. The foreman walks the aisle with a pencil and a card. Wipers checked, controller fingers true, sander stocked. He pulls the sand lever, a short thread runs to the railhead and goes to ground useful. He notes the shoes on the brake beams, not thin, not proud. He leans and taps a journal box lid with his knuckle. The oil inside says nothing, which is what oil should say when it has nothing to prove. He pats the destination glass, more habit than affection, and nods to the motorman. That nod weighs the same every morning, and the car knows it. If your attention wanders to the open barn doors and the blue square of dawn past them, nothing here will mind. The pole wheel will still find the wire, the compressor will still make what air should be, the roll sign will still hold its place. At the substation 3 streets over, the operator unlocks a single steel door and inhales the clean, warm smell a rotary makes when it has slept well. The room holds 2 great machines, motor generator rotaries with commutators like brass crowns and shafts like promises. Above them, knife switches sit behind a fence along the wall, meters voltage, amperage, a watt-hour drum that narrates in polite circles. He checks the oiler's cups, filled to the mark chiseled into the stems, and gives each a quarter turn. He touches the bearing caps with the back of his fingers. Warm, but not yet, is the answer he prefers. He closes the AC side breaker with a long-handled lever, waits for the slight, righteous hum, then brings the rotary up field first, armature, next listening for balance, like a man tuning a piano, haze known since spring. The brush rigging settles into a small chorus of hiss that means we remember. DC bus climbs to 600. Needle ease, not leap. He closes the feeder breaker and watches the ammeter's hand lean toward useful. Somewhere in the barn, the pole shoes will become more sure of themselves now, and men will not think of it at all. Back at the doors, the first car noses out as if the street belonged to it and it to the street. The pole wheel climbs the frog of the yard switch, clicks across the split with the exact note a sparrow would approve of, and goes on. Iron tires on steel make their small clean syllables. The motorman throws the reverser handle into forward by feel 3 teeth, a seat that knows his hand and notches the controller 1, 2. The motors answer without fuss, and the car learns walking before it tries anything else. At the curb, a boy in a cap counts cars with his chin and puts one in his pocket like a marble. The line truck has its own morning. A crew in denim coats loads the bed, Insulators wrapped in paper hangers, pull-offs, frogs in a crate with straw, a coil of trolley wire bronze, a colour the sun likes, and a bag of small things that always matter: sleeves, cotters, the good jaw wrench whose temper is right. They lift a ladder and tie its middle with to half hitches, and a turn because wind is a teacher, and cupboards of tools should not become confessions in the street. The truck rolls its bell, gives a single admonition to a driver who is thinking about bread. The crew sits like men who have learned to talk with their shoulders. A pole at the corner needs a new span wire. He the droop where last summer ran hotter than expected. If sleep pulls at your eyes for a minute, no knot will come loose while you're away. The span will still be measured by the gauge. The insulator will still seat into its clip. The crew will still lean into the pull together, quiet as a prayer that knows its language. On the car, the conductor sets the time card in the little clip by the rear platform. River inbound, first trip, 5:31. He rings once go and leans, then rings twice stop when a man in a bowler debates the curb and decides to ride. The bell is a civilized thing, not a gong, not a horn. It speaks one language in syllables nearly the whole town can translate without thinking. The man climbs to steps and turns sideways like a person who has practiced hats among other people. He drops a coin the fare box. Does its small hunger the coin lives where paper will write its account later. The route meets the yard throat and picks up pace. Overhead, the wire hangs in a shallow, planned catenary from span to span, with a touch of upward pull at intersections, so pole wheels will not be tempted by any mischievous ways. A frog in the wire at third and hickory guides shoes across a splitter hanger at each foot, keeps the wire honest. A porcelain insulator sits like a small moon above the hardware. The pole wheel passes with a tidy whir and a click. Nothing else comments. Underfoot, the girder rail holds a slot dark line for the paving to end against, and the paving politely does. By the river bridge, the substation's second rotary takes its duty, so the feeder will not learn jealousy. The operator brings it up and watches the two machines lean their shoulders together at the bus. He writes a small line in the book, 6050. To online, load 288 total. He oils the governor on no. One and straightens the nameplate without thinking about it. Nameplates, like pens and door latches, work better when they stand square. On the hill above the freight depot, the line crew sets a pull-off. The span wire comes down from building to building. A small pulley takes a messenger cable around the corner. The trolley wire hangs with a touch of persuasion, where a straight line would have taught the pole wheel bad lessons. The foreman gives a number in inches. The second man on the ladder moves his hand a finger's breadth and calls back the same number without making it sound like a favor. A sleeve gets squeezed with the tool that grew strong years ago and never complained about the work. The frog throat gets a smear of graphite with a rag that lives in a tobacco tin. The tin goes back to a pocket that would be called a pocket in any language. If your thoughts drift to the river below or to the bakery opening its little windows, the car will not jolt you to attention. It will keep to its notch. Take the curve without boasting and ring once for a crossing, if noise were a contract to be kept and not an invitation to an argument. Mid-morning, a car slips a shoe at the Y ordinary, not crisis. The wheel finds the wrong path, walks a foot, and complains like a violin string. The motorman stops, sets the brake not too tight, lifts the pole with the rope, and sets it back in the wire by hand, looking along the curve so the base spring will not take offense. He checks the wheel for a burr with his thumb. It passes. He glances at the frog throat. The graphite is a little shy. He leaves a touch from his own tin. He calls the conductor forward. To men sharing a small skill teach the morning to calm itself. They roll on, bell once, and make the next time point without needing to apologize to the clock. In the barn, the car house machinist lays a motor armature on V-blocks and checks its commutator with a gauge and a careful eye. He dresses a mica undercut with a hacksaw blade ground thin and square the slots, learn their depth again. He turns the armature by hand and listens to the brushes whisper the same whisper they whispered last fall. He writes okay in chalk, because chalk has a good relationship with copper. On the next bench, a man trews a step tread with a file that has earned the right to be trusted. Breeze from the big door carries a little grit. He throws a sheet over the open journal because he refuses to teach Grit new tricks. At noon, the substation rolls a little more hum into itself. Load climbs lunch hour, stores clattering with gates up, a school letting out early because a teacher owns a toothache, and a cousin with a chair and a gentle drill. The operator watches the voltmeter twitch when 3 cars tie into one block at Main, and he adds a notch of field. He notes the feeder temperature with a hand near the bus not close, not proud, and puts a fan on a bearing housing because kindness to bearings is cheap and returns interest. He adds 1 line to the book as dispassionate as weather. Field +1 at 12:19 bus 600 steady. If you have closed your eyes now, the town still connects wire to shoe, wheel to rail, note to note. Schedules will keep their shape without breath on their necks. Copper, steel, and canvas will continue their small agreements. Afternoon, a shower strolls in the way showers do when they are more interested in sidewalks than roofs. Sparrows find the car roof edge and argue about none of the important things. The trolley wire learns a skin of water. The pole wheel hisses a little but behaves. The controller handle grows only as warm as it should in a hand that knows when to let a car coast. A couple with parcels sits under the drop sash and watches the blurred names on familiar glass. Millinery, grocer, a watch repair that is very sure of its claim to speed and never quite wrong about it. Toward 3. The line truck returns to the barn for a coil of small wire and carries out a wooden stencil that says keep clear of frog shop. They lay it at a crossing where someone thought paint should be a poem. Is better as a sign. The painter kneels and rolls a thin word where wheels know to listen. A boy reads it without moving his lips, nods as if he wrote it himself, and decides not to step where he might have otherwise. The painter wipes the brush on a rag and enjoys a private triumph he will not mention. On the late run, a motorman shows a new higher the hand that goes with the mouth when calling stops. To fingers to the glass for next, palm near the rope for after that. A thumb toward the bell for watch this crossing, it waits until you stop watching. He hands the controller over and stands a foot behind and to the left, like a music teacher who is sure of both instrument and student. The car answers differently to the new hand, and then, after 2 blocks, the same. Steel is democratic that way. The substation eases its shoulders in the blue hour. The operator floats no to down, a little field less. The bus still at its line. He writes the small facts again, numbers that eat whirring and return com. He walks the room, sets a drop of oil where a wick learned to be stingy, tightens a set screw that went from content to merely agreeable, and wipes the meter glass with a cloth that has touched nothing salt or weak. He stands a minute listening for any note that asks for apology. There is none. He nods to the machines, which do not need it but never object. Dusk brings lamps to the cars, and the town sees itself in windows it ignored at noon. Interior globes, milk glass, glow at half strength to keep eyes comfortable. The conductor swings his punch, a wristwatch that knows time. The motorman keeps his speed, so pedestrians can read each other's faces in the windows, as if they were reading in a small book. The pole wheel writes its thin sibilant over the wire and sometimes loses its shyness enough to send a little music to sleepers in upstairs rooms who have learned to fold that sound into their dreams. If you set your attention down like a coat on an empty chair now, the night will keep it safe. Cars will drift to barns, poles will drop into pocket switches, will be swept, numbers will find their lines on cards that go in drawers that have learned to hold names gently. Closing is kindly work. Back in the barn, the motorman throws the reverser to off and removes it. The handle goes to its hook. Never in the well where rain ever once got it. He lets the pole down, rope in hand. Not the easy way. The shoe settles into the tongue with hardly a sigh. He drains the air tanks with two short pulls, so water won't think to take up residence. The floor under the truck learns whether it was a dry day by the whisper of air, not by any show. The conductor turns the roll sign to barns again and leaves it square. He empties the fare box into the safe can lid, lock, chain and a line on a card, learns the number of a day's small trades. He lifts his lunch pail, lighter in a way that remembers apples and an ordinary sandwich. The foreman walks the tracks with a broom whose bristles have memories of better pasture. He sweeps the switch points because tomorrow's first car should not be asked to argue with grit. He chalks a little note on a step, "Tighten here," and the chalk stays where it was put and will tell the truth in the morning. He cuts the lights in sections, leaving the last bay lit until he has turned to see with his own eyes that everything that should be home is home. He locks the door and tugs it once. The substation goes to one machine. Without drama, the bus stays where a line on a card says it should stay. The operator draws the final line of the day beneath a small column of numbers and tilts the pencil on the pad until it rests at 4 o'clock, his habit. He turns the key in the door and looks up the street where overhead wire draws a second horizon, copper the color of late tea. He does not think anything ceremonial. He puts his hands in his coat pockets and walks. Night asks the town for fewer cars. The barn's roof learns the soft patter of a shower, becoming a story told in short words. Upstairs windows go dark, just far enough ahead of downstairs ones to maintain the town's modesty. What keeps gravity from being the only law? Rails keep wheels from guessing. The car house cat chooses the warm square above a gearbox and lives there in a coil that has nothing to do with the electricity and all to do with sleep. The 14th part. River flat country under a big, undecided sky. The canal runs straight a while, then bows, then straightens again, as if a careful hand had drawn it with a yard rule and forgiven itself at the bends. Gravel towpath on one side, water trim against clay banks faced with stone. A mile down, a pair of gates lean together into an upstream V, the locker timber face banded with iron. Mitre sill on the floor, where the gate heels find home. On the head gate a balance beam reaches out over the coping like a friendly arm. Beyond, the roof of the Waylock house sits low and square, bricks the colour of bread, shutters are green that would be too proud if it were any brighter. Mules come in pairs, bells small and simple at their collars, rope steady on the hame rings, harness patched where honest use taught it to need care. The tow line touches the water now and then thinks better of it. The lock tender sweeps a leaf from the coping with the back of his boot, the kind of gesture water respects. He leans his shoulder into the balance beam and tests the gate without asking for more from his back than he promised it this spring. The heel post answers in the pintles with a polite groan. The mitre closes, coin stones take the load, and the strap hinges settle like men into good chairs. His hand drops to the rack stand where the sluice gear lives, square shaft, pinion, rack, teeth worn smooth by water and winter both. He takes the windlass handle from its peg, seats it in the square, and walks the arc slow. A paddle valve under the gate begins to rise. The little chamber speaks first to hiss, then a steady voice water lifts the boat in the chamber, nudges its fenders, and decides to be patient. The packet boat comes under the bridge like a well-behaved thought. Her paint shows the last decade in chalk and scars her windows where curtains that know about laundry days and naps her deck carries trunks and crates that have never heard of romance and don't need to. The helmsman eases the tiller to let the stern walk true. The bowman steps to the fore rope with a neat turn around the snubbing post and lets the line pay just enough to learn manners. The captain, who never shouts, calls easy in a voice that knows everyone on shore by a first name and all the dogs by profession. The lock tender walks the beam off the gate, opens a good degree, the bow slides in the stern, follows fenders kiss stone, and away neither the stone of the fenders complain about. The tender closes the lower gate, one smooth pull, one sensible push, no theatre. He takes the windlass to the upper stand and opens the paddles one, and then the other, because two voices rising at once make a better conversation with a boat than one shouting and then remembering how to be kind. If your attention slips to the towpath mule, who's fitting the gravel, driver's hand resting on the butt of the whip, the way a man rests a hand on a table, he trusts the chamber will still rise its measured handfuls. The timbers will still hold their opinions. The water will keep settling its small quarrels against stone until it reaches the next level without asking you to be the referee. Up by the Waylock, a single high door opens to the canal. Inside, timbers frame a wet cradle the width of a boat and the length of a day's honesty. Knife edges sit on piers of dressed stone, a beam balances above, with iron pointers facing a scale board painted with numbers that have caused fewer arguments than most numbers cause. The clerk keeps his ledger on a slanted desk near a window, pen in a bottle where grit doesn't think to visit. Boats come in light once a year and get their tear, the number nobody admires in a tavern, but everybody respects in a ledger. Loaded, they sit in the cradle a short minute while water runs out of the weighing pit, and the beam has a chance to decide what the boat has brought to town or intends to take away. The clerk reads, checks the computations he did in Windsor when the river taught him patience, and sets a seal on a paper that will ride under a berth mattress and be found by a man whose handwriting looks like a path home. Today, the packet is passengers and smalls a trunk, a crate of crockery, a bag of mail, a barrel that swears it's only nails. No way needed. She drifts by the house with a nod. The clerk nods back without inventing any ceremony. The bridge above the lock is a simple swinger timber deck on a pintle that will remember to turn at noon when someone comes along with a cart that can't be invited to try a jump. Water lifts in the chamber. The tender counts by boards set into the wall sound as marks 12 feet. 13. The sill stays 3 below, as it should. He shuts the left paddle first to take the twist out of the hole, then the right, then eases both another notch to let the boat sit steady under its own small weight. The mules stop of their own choosing. The driver rests a hand on the near mule's neck, and the mule forgives him. A boy on deck moves a fender half a foot with the toe of his shoe and discovers he belongs to a world in which small adjustments make days better. The gate opens toward the upper reach. The tow line over the horn of the forebit takes its new angle. Without complaining, the helmsman gives the tiller a thumb's worth. The boat's bow finds the line where the channel makes good sense and refuses to look dramatic. Outside the lock, the tow rope picks up its catenary again. The mules lean. The driver clucks once, and the boat thinks forward. A duck lifts out of the weeds along the opposite bank and does not pretend to be surprised. A white dog hears his name from the other side of the bridge and arranges to be in the right place later without rushing. Past a lock, the canal runs through a bit of town. A grain storehouse with a hoist beam over the water, a coal shed with side doors that learn to slide along old iron, a yard with hoop poles stacked in long bundles that hope to become barrels. A woman draws water at a pump where a long handle knows the weight of the day. She eyes the packet's windows and counts faces idly as if she were counting birds. The bell at the towpath crossing is a hand bell. The driver lifts it, gives 2 honest strokes, and lets the bell hang by its thong again, because bells need to be reminded, but not harassed. The mules get their bridge walk. A tow rope rises to a bridge rail iron. A roller there turns under the rope, so it won't decide to cut what it rests on. The driver takes the outside of the post and calls keep, one small word that means walk together across something that could become trouble if ignored. They do. The rope lowers, the roller stops. No one congratulates anyone. The canal's manners are learned things, not trophies. If you let your eyes close across one reach and open them at the next, you will not have missed anything the place needed from you. The water will still hold its gloss, the rope will still hold its lay, the gate hinges will still prefer oil. 2 words. Toward evening, the aqueduct comes, the canal crossing a river on its own bridge, stone arches carrying a trough lined in plank and pitch. The first time, men told stories about it in ways that would have made sleep shy. Now it is a road for water like any other, and the boat slides onto it without comment. Down below, the river runs its own old errands between boulders. Up here, mules tread the timber way, and the tow rope hums a little tune near a pier. A marker post on the aqueduct rail says nothing in particular, and no one resents its silence. At the far end, a keeper in a shed that knows wind watches for signs, which boat has a mind to wait for a downbound, and which prefers to put a hand on the horn and talk about it. He sets out a red lamp on a stake. When fall comes a colour the canal understands better than speeches. Tonight, the air stays clean. He writes a line on a slate and leans it where another keeper will see it. Boat, direction, intention, and the slate does the work of a telegraph without wires or adjectives. The towpath narrows at a cut where stone shoulders in, high and close. The driver gives the rope the gentlest slack so it will ride the inside curve and not sulk against the coping. In the cut, you listen to your footfalls, you hear the mules breathe, you learn the way a line tells you the boat is pulling before any person says so. One small outcrop wears a smear of iron rust where tow rope kissed it any time anyone forgot someone nailed a leather guard there last summer. The leather is learning to be useful by becoming scarred. Every few miles, there is a change bridge, a little staircase for rope. One leg of the bridge crosses the canal and holds a big roller at head height over the towpath. Mules go up and over. Rope stays low, boat glides under, and no one ever has to deal with a rope so tangled even a saint would think ill of it. The driver smacks his gloves together once dust, not drama, and the gloves go back to saying nothing when not called to speak. There is a short stop at a lock where no one is waiting on either side unusual this hour, but a packet can enjoy such luck without tempting the next mile. The tender here wears his cap with the bill a little too long but uses his windlass well. He opens the paddles slower than his neighbour, and nobody minds because his chambers have less mischief about them later. The captain hands up a folded paper, a note for the lock above regarding a parcel someone forgot to put off, and the tender tucks it under a stone, the post where such things live for the next man on the tow. People lean toward helpfulness on this water, the way grass leans toward sun. If drowsiness takes your hand a minute, go along the mule bells, will keep a place in the sound for you to return to the paddle valves, will keep their rhythm. A snubbing post will be where it should when the stern needs one. Night comes as a decision made in stages. Lanterns on the cabin bulkhead take a match and settle into small, dependable coins. A side light at the bow answers with its own little bravado and then behaves. On the towpath, the driver ties a tin lantern to the near mule's aims with a bit of string the mule tolerates, because this mule tolerates more than most creatures and asks less. The rope becomes a line that has both weight and light. The canal's surface reflects the sky with fewer opinions than it had at noon. At the Waylock house, lamps behind glass become eyes that prefer honesty. Tonight, a coal boat eases into the cradle, water drains under it, knives settle, and the beam tells its number. The clerk writes with the economy of someone who spends spare words where words don't help. He sand sprinkles the ink so the pages won't stick and blows a little grit off the corner, and shakes his head at himself for blowing where sand will not mind staying. The coal boat leaves, hull higher by a puddle's depth, and the cradle takes a breath and a drink back into itself and waits for morning, which will come regardless of plays or sermons. The packet runs on to the next level and the next. The driver gives the mules their stops on the schedule. They understand without a whistle 5 minutes for water, where a trough stands under a willow, a roll of oats, with a dipper, a curry, where sweat made a map on a shoulder. The driver's supper is bread, and something in a pail, and a coffee the colour of a good decision. He shares a crust with the white dog in town, who might be the white dog from 2 locks back, or might be his cousin, and does not deserve an argument either way. An upbound freight waits in the next chamber. The tenders exchange a few words to board shy. Close left first, rope clear of paddle, a language that has nothing to prove and everything to save. The boats trade places like men on a narrow stair who remember each other from winter. A small boy on the freight holds a lantern like a license and lifts it when he knows he should. He's thanked without words by not being corrected. After midnight, fog comes along the bottom lands. The waywool finds a chair. The keeper at the aqueduct sets the red lamp. The one at the swing bridge turns his cap backward and keeps his pockets close to weather. The mules walk closer. The driver shortens the line a hand's width. The bow gets a little more respect. The packet's bow shows a grey that is not light and not shade, but something a good boat knows how to push aside. A horn downriver says it cares, and is coming. The canal answers with its own quiet courtesy. The bell on the towpath, the lamplight on the balance beam, the water speaking against wood in the language locks understand. At the end of the night reach, there is a guard lock gates that sit easiest when no one needs them and offer their spines when a freshet tries to tell the canal a story the canal doesn't want to memorize. The tender there checks his stop planks between posts, the long timbers that can be stood into grooves to make a wall of wood that neither water nor argument goes through much. He leans a plank to a rail and leaves it there because one day in spring something will ask for it, and his back will be glad he decided to avoid heroics. Dawn thinks about making promises. The canal does not wait for assurances. The tender at the first lock of the day takes his windlass off its peg again. And the teeth of the rack say they were sleeping, yes, but sleeping lightly. The clerk opens the waylock window on a hinge that never squeaks because it has been taught where the oil can lives. A small boy on a dock, the same or a cousin of the last, holds a string in water because fish and boys agree on a surprising lot when nothing is asked of them other than to show up with patience. We leave the packet here for a breakfast that will be milk in a cup and a little fruit and a buttered slice that tastes more of effort than of anything else. The rope will be coiled where it won't teach anyone to trip. The mules will stand nose to tail and think private mule thoughts about shade. The balance beam will lean where it leans every morning. The water will carry the last bit of night along like a letter addressed to whoever needs it.